On the threshold of life, a bright white aura appears, and everything ends with death, which, by irony of fate, is not the end, but the beginning of a new path because they give him a second chance. And this time, he doesn't plan on wasting it. From his past life, he had one unfulfilled goal remaining, to become a true sword master. And now he is determined to see it through to the end. And deep down, when someone returns with a clear goal and the experience of their previous life, it stops being just progress and becomes a direct path to the top. This content is an original narrative recap by the channel author, created with a specific style. With its own structure and approach, it does not reproduce the original material literally, and it constitutes a transformative work. Formative, this scoundrel reincarnated as a simple civilian working for a noble house. Nobody knows it, and that's why they humiliated him. But in reality, he is a great sword master of his era. And now he won't forgive anyone. He trained in swordsmanship for over 70 years, and now that he has reincarnated into an era of peace, everyone is ridiculously weak compared to him, so much so that he humiliated a high-ranking imperial guard. From the noble house right in front of his lord, he knocked him out cold. The adoptive father and lord of the entire castle doesn't even know what to say upon seeing this. Before, he was completely humiliated and was rude to people. Now he even trains his attractive adoptive sister. That's because he has a lot of experience with pretty sisters. I mean, with swords, he trains well and rigorously. He even hits her. The guy has become a Sigma Chad, and she likes it. When he was young, he helped heroes become heroes. Other sword masters, archmages, martial artists. He achieved all the fame in the world. But that wasn't for him. He considered himself unworthy and remained in the shadows. This was because he never had talent for the sword, only a love for it, but at the end of his life, he ended up becoming an authentic sword master, but it was already too late for him, at least in that life. Now he has reincarnated. He is many years younger. He has no idea who the owner of this body was, nor where he is. But while walking through the castle, he recognizes the place and thinks it's one of the territories where he served in his last life. In any case, he needs to figure out whose body he is in. And when he looks to the side, he is surprised. There beside him was a girl training with her sword. Our hero wonders if this is the Lord's daughter, because he doesn't remember seeing a girl like her in his previous life. However, her sword technique is similar to that hero's. To be honest, she seemed quite talented. At the same time, the girl realizes that our hero is watching her, and she calls him Asher. She asks him what he is doing just standing there while the others are training. Then the boy asks if that is the Rapenna sword technique, because, judging by her, she must have been training constantly for at least 4 or 5 years. However, her movements are still a bit unstable, so he tells her to relax and to try to go a bit slower. Instantly, the girl throws the sword at the poor boy's head, asking him why he is speaking so familiarly, and if he shouldn't show some respect to his master and call her Lady Reika. Next, Asher apologizes, thinking he had believed that girl was his sister. Right after, Reika asks why someone who has never held a sword is suddenly there, and she also wants to know how he knows the hero's sword technique. If you don't do it right, you'll regret it. Then Asher thinks he can't believe he had the nerve to try to teach the lady of that castle. Next, he heads toward the dummy, raising his sword, and meanwhile, the girl just watched, asking if that isn't the stance of the imperial sword technique, wanting to know when he started learning it. As today he seems very different, Asher remains silent, thinking that he has been doing this for over 70 years. And the moment he attacks, at the same time, a huge explosion occurs. The guy keeps thinking non-stop that having a young body is really very interesting. After all, it seems that with a body like this you can do anything, right? Right after that, man, the guy shatters the dummy into millions of pieces. And the girl, meanwhile, just watched. The protagonist thinks he can't control himself when he has a sword in his hand. And right after that, he apologizes to Reika, who says it's no problem, since that is the sword technique developed in the Empire. She was still very skeptical, wondering how such a common sword technique could reach that level of speed and destructive power. Suddenly, she compliments our boy, saying he is incredible, and that only now had she realized he had that talent. And she asks him why he had hidden that skill all this time. To be honest, she thought he was a useless loafer, but she was very wrong. Wow, so he was at that level. Asher is very embarrassed, and just at that moment, another man appears, asking her what she was doing with that guy. Just by looking at this guy, you can already tell he's not trustworthy. And then he says that since the protagonist is awake, he should go out and chop wood. And he asks him how he dares to speak to his family in such a brazen way. He has to remember that he is nothing more than a commoner, while they are nobles. Meanwhile, Asher thinks that guy is really very rude. Looking at the protagonist's hand, the guy realizes he was holding Rieka's sword. But anyway, this is the perfect moment. After all, he needed a training partner. Unsheathing his sword, he tells him that if he lasts a minute, he will acknowledge his skill. Instantly, his sister asks him to stop. And then the man says that, obviously, he wasn't going to kill him. However, Rieka says that's not the point and that, honestly, she doesn't think he would be capable of doing it. Meanwhile, Asher just observed, thinking that the guy's stance is completely wrong, wondering how a girl like Leica could have such an idiotic older brother. Immediately, the two get ready, and then the fight finally begins. At the same time, a sword flies through the air, and the victory, after just a few seconds, goes to the protagonist. Obviously, but incredibly, he didn't want to win, thinking that losing on purpose is harder than he thought. At that very instant, a bit of ketchup starts coming out of the man's face, and instantly he gets furious. Then things went wrong, my friend. I want to see how the protagonist is going to get out of this one. The scene then shifts to another part of the castle, where that guy says Asher should be severely punished, mentioning that a servant employed by the castle dared to hurt the lord. Plus, they can no longer tolerate his actions, which dishonor the dignity of the nobility. The old man calls the protagonist and asks him if what Luke said was true, and Asher seems to recognize that old man, wondering if he might have become a lord. 40 years ago, when he had just been named captain of the guard, he remembers having visited the guard with the former lord. And that guy was much younger, so at that moment, our boy assumes that at least 20 years have passed since he died. Then Leverok says that they had treated Asher like a son all this time, but that this time he lost perspective on his actions. Anyway, he deserves a punishment, but considering the affection they had for him, they will be more reasonable. They ask him to leave the territory immediately, but the other woman says to do anything but that. However, Leverok had a bad temper and said he had only tolerated Asher because of her, but that this time he could no longer forgive him. After all, they cannot continue showing affection to an ungrateful child who does not recognize the grace of having been raised. Anyway, he should be grateful. They expel him without him suffering any harm. And right after that, Rieka appears, saying that it was her brother who was wrong. He injured himself with his own sword while charging at Asher, and Asher was just teaching him how to use a sword. And to be honest, her brother's terrible swordsmanship is the true shame to the nobility that really overwhelmed the boy. Faced with that, of course, Leverok is surprised and asks if Asher was really teaching him how to handle the sword. The girl says that Asher possesses a high level of skill that made her want to have him as a mentor. And besides, he has changed to the point of committing to training her brother. Upon hearing that, of course, he is surprised and asks her if she really wants to learn that guy's useless style. Then she says she has witnessed the boy's sword skills with her own eyes, and that if they don't believe her, they should ask him to demonstrate his skills directly. The Count just watches everything in silence. Next, he calls the guard and asks him to test Asher's swordsmanship. His wife says that is a bit excessive, but Leverok tells her not to worry, since it is just a simple evaluation. No, yeah, I already realize this isn't going to end well. Meanwhile, the old man thinks he has no idea what trick Asher used to start practicing sword handling, much less to bewitch Rieka. But if this is some kind of joke, he is going to regret it and they will undoubtedly kill him. The two prepare for battle, and Koren thinks that this idiot has dared to try to teach Rieka. And as if that weren't enough, not even before Lady Venetia is he going to hold back, and he launches himself directly at the protagonist. Rieka watched everything from afar, thinking that, if what she saw was true, Asher could undoubtedly stand up to Koren. Then the guard realizes that Asher was trembling, and asks him if he thought using a sword would be so easy. Anyway, since they are here, he will teach him a lesson. Then the exchange continues with full force. And Koren thinks Asher didn't even master the basics, and was already talking about being a swordsman. Just as he had imagined, he is weak and extremely arrogant, and he wonders to himself how he dares to try to tarnish the great art of the sword. Asher does nothing but defend himself. Then Lebrok says he thinks that was too much for the protagonist. Rika didn't understand anything either. Then Luke says this is to be expected from the best graduate of the Imperial Academy, and that there is no way Asher can face him. Our boy keeps smiling, and Karen thinks that Brat is pathetic, telling him to remember the difference between the two of them. At the same time, Asher says he has put on a quite interesting show, and that now he will return the favor. Then our protagonist raises his sword, and with a single strike he sends Koren flying through the air. Everyone is stunned by what they saw, and the guard was trying to understand what that had been. Well, my friend, Now the tables have turned, and Asher, mocking him, tells the guard he didn't even land it well. And yet he has fallen, however, in his head. Our boy wonders why this generation is so weak, assuming it is because they lived in a time of peace. Anyway, he will have to fix all this by teaching military discipline. He keeps looking at Karen, saying that he is the leader of the Templars in the Arak territory, asking if he is really going to fall at the hands of a simple commoner. Then the guy, furious, charges directly at the protagonist. He tries to strike him, but our boy easily dodges it, and then punches the poor guy in the face. Everyone was watching what was happening, because the protagonist had literally smashed the guard's face. Karen couldn't take it anymore, and Asher thinks it is shameful. If this had been in those days, not only a commander like him, but even any private soldier was incomparably better. Still, countless soldiers died fighting against demons without being able to do anything. This is supposed to be an era of peace, but even so, they shouldn't allow themselves to become so soft. Right after that, a group of soldiers pounces on Asher, and Venetia asks her husband to put an end to this at once. Then he asks the protagonist who he really is. Damn yes, now everything is truly falling apart. After all, he is not the Asher they know. Our boy remains silent for a few seconds, but he comes up with an excuse, saying he has lost his memory. Yes, much better than saying he has reincarnated. This morning, when he woke up, he didn't remember anything. To be honest, he doesn't know who he is, let alone who they are. And the only thing left to him is the memory of his swordsmanship. At first, he thought that using the sword would help him recover his memories, but he still feels that void in his chest. But in any case, it's clear he had hurt the boss, and kneeling, our boy says he accepts any kind of punishment. Everyone falls silent, and a little later, inside a room, Asher thinks he needs time to organize himself. That's why, until everything is resolved, he won't leave his room. He stares fixedly at his sword. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Rieka thinks that Asher has changed a lot, and it's as if he had become a completely different person. What she doesn't know is that, until yesterday, that boy wasn't like that. After all, he had never held a sword, and his behavior was rude. He is her mother's adoptive son, and before she and her brother were born, her mother found him abandoned outside the castle back then. Her mother was depressed because she had no children, so she personally took charge of the protagonist. And so, since the two of them were born, Asher has been part of the family, but their relationship deteriorated over time. Her mother always showered Asher with love and obsession, and it even seemed like she favored him in some way. Despite all her efforts, Asher drifted away, and his behavior caused chaos on the estate. In fact, he was about to be expelled from the castle, but thanks to his mother, he was allowed to stay on the condition that he worked as a servant. Yes, the guy who used to be in the MC's body was trash. He was definitely a complete idiot. But then, out of nowhere, he suddenly changed. From his way of speaking to his behavior. Basically, his entire personality changed completely. Besides the fact that he now acts like a sword master who has trained for years to reach that level. Shortly after, Rieka knocks on the protagonist's door, saying she has brought him some food. She opens the door, and man, the protagonist had his sword raised. It didn't look friendly at all. Then man, all you see is the food falling to the floor. Nothing good is going to come of this. The poor girl was trembling with fear on the floor. And Asher, upon seeing it was Rieka, apologizes. He had seen a sword in the room, and thought about practicing a little, yes, and he almost killed the girl. The two stand there in silence. And a little later, Rieka watched for a while as the protagonist trained. He really is obsessed with the art of the sword. And then Asher calls her, asking her what kind of person he was before losing his memory. After all, no one he sees in that place seems to have a very good relationship with him. Upon hearing that, Rieka tells him he was very different, except for his mother, to his family. And even the people of the castle didn't like him. Resorting to violence or destroying property were some of the things he did in the past. And upon hearing that, Asher thinks that this body really crossed the line. Shortly after, he asks her why Rieka speaks to him normally, if she is supposed to despise him too. However, Rieka asks him why she would do that. After all, the way he is now is much better than asking him to take care of her. Wow, what kind of idea is that? The boy remains without saying a single word, and shortly after, someone knocks on the door asking if they can come in. It was Venetia, and Asher believes she is Leverok's wife. Our boy then kneels and asks her what he can do for her. But Venetia simply takes the boy's face in her hands and tells him he doesn't have to treat her like that. Whatever happens, she was the one who raised him, and she asked him to treat her as he always has. Faced with that, Asher says that the Asher she knew is no longer here, but even so, she looks at him with great affection, even though to him she is a complete stranger. At the same time, she hugs the protagonist, telling him that it was she who found him first. When she turned 20, she still didn't have an heir, and so she ended up finding him abandoned outside the castle. When she took him in her arms and saw the child smile, her world changed, and despite the opposition of others, she raised him with love and care. Even if he sees her as a stranger, it doesn't matter, since she raised and loved him as her own son. Meanwhile, Asher wonders if he can really start over by becoming someone else, thinking that those people meant nothing to his past self. A little later in Leverock's hall, he assumed the protagonist might be a demon, but that must have been just a foolish worry. That race disappeared a long time ago, and even if one existed, it has no connection to Asher. After all, he would probably infiltrate the nobles to gain more power, and there is no reason to stay in the body of a commoner. However, for a boy like that, defeating a high-level knight like Karen is something else. To make matters worse, his daughter also wanted to become his student, and shortly after, someone says they are having an interesting conversation. A guy with his hood pulled well down was sitting on the window, and then the guards pounce on him, asking him who he is. At the same time, the guy easily blocks the attack, saying that, actually, he's not bad with a sword, and mentions that Leverock has decent soldiers. Just then, the hooded man throws the poor guy, saying that if he were a little younger, he would have managed to fight. Nobody understood what was happening, and at that very moment, Karen seems to recognize who the man was. Leverock says that 20 years have already passed, welcoming him home, the one who reached the title of Sword Master called Hai-Ben. Man, isn't that the guy the protagonist was friends with in the past? A little later, Leverock asks where he has been. He suddenly disappeared 20 years ago, and he even thought he had died. Then the guy says there was something he needed to investigate. He traveled to the ends of the world, and man, it doesn't look like he found anything good there. But even so, he still hadn't figured it all out. Changing the subject, he asks if there was a boy who had defeated one of Leverock's knights, and the man answers yes. Besides, he was a commoner who had never properly studied the art of the sword. And then Ivan says that he must possess exceptional talent and asks him to tell him more about it. Meanwhile, the protagonist was telling Rieka to attack him with all her might. However, the girl asks him why he still hasn't drawn his sword. But Asher says this doesn't have to do with sword skills. It is real combat training, and it starts even before drawing the sword. In any case, you have to face him with the intent to kill him. Rieka asked to be his disciple, and he refused due to the difference in status between them. But her determination was strong enough to keep insisting. At the same time, the girl pounces on Asher, but he dodges every blow, thinking that she undoubtedly has talent, and that her skills are quite good. But even so, she is still very weak, and her movements are very predictable. Rieka falls to the floor, and then Asher offers her his hand to help her up, saying she is strong. But that only applies to the sword. Before swordsmanship, she has to train her mind and her body. After all, real combat is completely different. In any case, she has to abandon this blind faith in swordsmanship, because simply knowing how to handle a sword is not enough to survive in a real fight. What she must learn now is how to control her emotions, because she can never lose her cool and composure. In front of his opponent, the boy keeps giving instructions and Rieka just watches, thinking that his skill is impeccable. She gets up immediately, and then the training begins, a little later. The class was already over, and the poor girl was completely exhausted. He never loses, and his stamina seems monstrous, but even so, she feels she is getting stronger. At that moment, her brother appears, asking if she was fooling around with that idiot. And Rieka tells him it was training. Luke says that being with a man is not training, and the girl answers that he can think what he wants. The two keep arguing, and Luke tells her she shouldn't learn from someone like him. At that very moment, Rieka draws her sword and tells him to shut up already. The boy immediately trembles with fear and tells her that if she hits him, it won't go well for her. At that very moment, another person appears and says that there is a sister who is trying to hit her brother. It was Hai-Ben, saying that it really is something unusual. Then Leverock approaches his daughter, saying that not even she would get away with it if she did something. Right after that, the girl looks to the side, wanting to know who that old man is. After all, somehow it seems there is something extraordinary about him. Luke calls him a sword master, and Rieka is immediately surprised. There are less than 10 in the entire empire, and then Luke says that he has always admired his sword skills, and asks to become his disciple, thinking that only a sword master could really teach him. But my friend, little does he know that the protagonist was also a master, but the poor boy was simply ignored. And Hai-Ben, speaking with Rieka, says it is a pleasure to meet her, thinking that this girl is not intimidated by him, and seems ready to counterattack at any moment, and wonders if he should test her. At that very moment, Highband grabs his sword and everyone just watched. Rieka, for her part, hadn't moved a muscle, wondering if this old man is really a sword master. At the same time, she remembers the protagonist's lessons, in which he said that maintaining composure before any opponent is extremely important. Meanwhile, the guy was drawing his large sword in front of her, but my friend. The girl was totally determined, and incredibly enough, she manages to block the blow. And Ivan is also surprised, right? Thinking that, when he sees new talents, he usually approaches them aggressively to evaluate their reactions. But they usually run away scared by his oppressive presence, or simply can't even withstand a light blow. Still, this young woman stood firm with a wooden sword in front of his blow, which means she undoubtedly has the determination of a warrior. At that very instant, the two separate, and the girl lunges directly at Highband. The man just watches everything in silence, wondering if Rieka belongs to any school called Rebania. He says it's really impressive. He counterattacks with his sword. Rieka finally falls to the ground, and the poor girl can't articulate a single word. Highband points his sword at her, and then Leverok asks him to stop all this. But then the man says that, unlike his cowardly son, he has a very brave daughter. And that leaves Luke completely dejected. Rappan was about to say something else, but at that very moment, Rieka gets up once more and, grabbing her sword, tries to fight again. Wow, this girl really doesn't give up. At that very instant, the man appears behind the girl, saying that she has even managed a counterattack while he was distracted, and that it is impressive. The poor girl didn't understand anything, and Ivan asks if she could take him to her teacher. Rieka says yes, then thinks that that guy is definitely not a normal person. A little later, Rieka thinks she has used all her strength, but he has dodged her attack like it was nothing. On top of that, there is also the fact that even her father is more cautious with that guy. Right after that, Rabin asks if her name is Rieka, wanting to know what she felt seeing that young man's sword skills. She answers that she felt as if she were fighting a veteran, and the man laughs at her for calling a boy of only 18 years that. A few minutes later, Ray-Ban says he hadn't visited this training ground in a long time. He once trained there with a great friend of his, and Leverok asks where that person is. He answers that, unfortunately, he is no longer alive, and my friend, it is undoubtedly the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist was training, and then someone calls him. It was Rieka, and Asher at that very moment is surprised to see who else was there. After all, it was his old friend, wondering why he was there. However, he remembers that Ivan had a connection with Leverok. When Leverok was young, he specifically asked Ivan to look after him. Ivan is glad that the protagonist recognizes him, and with a smile, he immediately begins to draw his sword. And Asher thinks he is going to see that habit again. Once again, he was always testing new talents, and in any case, it has been quite a while since the last time he did it. At that very instant, the protagonist also draws his sword, and incredibly enough, that leaves Highben speechless, thinking that it is impeccable swordsmanship. Just then a flashback appears in which he speaks to the protagonist, who says that his skill is nothing compared to Highben's. However, the man says they simply took different paths, and proposes a training bout for old time's sake. The two begin to fight and seem to share some kind of camaraderie, and returning to the present. Highben seemed to see that same energy in the protagonist. Little did he know that this guy was precisely the same one. The guy kept obsessing over all this, and suddenly he names Asher captain of the guard. Everyone falls silent, and Leverok asks him what he just said, to which he replies that it was nothing. Then he calls Asher, asking him if by chance he is a disciple of that guy. But our boy says he doesn't know what he's talking about, since he has no master. Upon hearing that, the man takes the opportunity to ask him if he wants to become his disciple. What is this so fast? Leverok is also surprised that a sword master wants a disciple. And at that very moment, Rieka asks him to wait, saying that, even if he is a sword master, he keeps attacking people out of the blue, asking him what kind of behavior that is, and if he can go around brandishing his sword at anyone just because he is a sword master. Leverok tells his daughter to watch her words, but Highben says it's okay, mentioning that young people these days don't know who he is, but in any case, he will show them right now. And out of nowhere, a giant tornado appears. Nobody understood what was happening, and Asher, observing the situation, thinks that that is the mark of a sword master. This is called aura, and at that very instant, Highben brandishes his sword, the guy attacks a mountain. And at the same time, a huge explosion occurs. We see that the mountain has been literally blown to pieces. Taking the opportunity, Hyben says, "It is a sword master," mentioning that talented people like them are destined to reach great heights, and asks Asher what he thinks about it and if he will become his disciple. Meanwhile, Rieka just stared at that immense power, wondering how powerful she would become if she were a disciple of that guy. But shortly after, Asher, incredibly enough, rejects the offer, which leaves everyone speechless. And a few minutes later, the whole city was happy that the sword master had arrived in their territory. Everyone wanted to see the sword master, but some guards prevented them from passing. Meanwhile, Asher was still training, saying that outside the castle it was chaos. And looking sideways, he asks Hyben if he isn't going to go there, who replies that he will stay there for a while, asking him if he really isn't going to become his disciple, and Asher says he already said no, thinking that this guy is already glued to him wherever he goes, so he can make him his disciple. Anyway, it's ridiculous to become a student of your friend. Faced with that, Asher points to Rieka, saying it would be more worth it to teach her. But the poor girl didn't seem very happy with that. Hyben says he had already asked her, but the girl refused, mentioning that she already has a master. Well, at least she is loyal. Upon hearing that, the protagonist is surprised and wonders if she rejected the offer to become a disciple of a sword master. All that just to be able to learn from him. After all, there was no need to go so far. Truth, a little later, night had already fallen and Luke was walking through the city. The boy was pissed off about what Hyben had said, thinking it was all that guy's fault. He had to disappear, and because of him, his life is a complete disaster. Man, blaming others is much easier. At that very moment, something pounced on him, and then my friend, the poor boy, gets caught by it. The big monster starts laughing, and a little later, the scene changes to Ad Hoc lying on the ground. Getting up, he wonders where he was, and just at that moment, someone calls him by his name. A guy with a hood on appears and says, "It is a pleasure to meet him, man. That dwarf doesn't look very good." Then a day passes, and Rieka, furious, says she can't stand that old man, asking if he shouldn't show more respect, mentioning that Asher isn't intimidated by him either, who believes it is because he is his friend. And besides that, he had also reached the level of sword master, and then says it wouldn't hurt to learn from Hyben. But Rieka says she wants to be like him. After all, he is the person she hopes to become one day, and she sincerely recognizes him as her master. Wow, that was very well said. So he has to stop belittling himself like that. And then, Asher thinks he has no talent for swordsmanship. All the art of swordsmanship in this world was created by the heroes of the past, and all swordsmen want to learn the heroic art of swordsmanship and surpass their human limits. However, he was different, because imperial swordsmanship is a basic style, and simple that anyone can learn, created and spread by the empire. It was the only art that someone without talent like him could learn. And so he lived his whole life wielding a sword using only that so-called imperial swordsmanship. But even so, he wanted to know why someone as talented as Rieka respected him so much. But in her mind, the girl thinks that Asher had made her much stronger. Before, she wouldn't have been able to withstand the pressure of that old man. And his lessons helped her a lot, thinking that he is basically her light. Wait, my friend, that's a bit exaggerated, isn't it? Then Haven appears, asking if it is a lover's quarrel. Wow, look at that. The old man of bad jokes. The protagonist asks him not to be ridiculous and looking at Haven's hand, asks him what that was, who replies that it is just a gift for him. After all, since he doesn't focus on the form of weapons, he can use any type of sword or equipment. Asher says that is true, thinking that imperial swordsmanship serves to lay the foundations. All that unlike heroic swordsmanship, which is based on superhuman techniques. However, the advantage of imperial swordsmanship is that heroic swordsmanship only applies to swords, while his works with any type of weapon. Returning to the present, Asher realizes that he has received iron gloves. Ivan says it is not just a gauntlet, because there is something much more interesting about it, and asks him to put strength into his arm and imagine any weapon. Asher does what he asked, and suddenly a dagger appears. Ivan says this is extremely useful, and Asher asks if by chance it is magic, to which he replies that it is spatial magic to store weapons, and that to put something inside. You just have to imagine doing it. Keep in mind that you can only store weapons, and Asher says that it would be useful to him, but useless to the swordsmen who are too obsessed with the form of their weapons, and asks why he created it. And Ivan says he didn't do it for him. In fact, he had made one for that friend, although he died before receiving it. Rieka asks if it's about that guy from 20 years ago he mentioned earlier, and Ivan says yes, because he also used imperial swordsmanship. And even though they went their separate ways, honestly, he really liked that guy. He accepted his lack of talent, didn't give up, and just followed his own path. Upon hearing that, Asher thinks he used to believe that someone without talent would have no value to heroes. But who would have thought he cared enough to do something like that? Just after that, Hyben tells Asher that he looks a lot like his friend, and that his behavior, and even his way of speaking are the same. His posture and his sword handling are also exactly the same. And to be honest, he ended up feeling envious and asked him once more if he would become his disciple. Upon hearing that, the protagonist smiles and then says he will accept it. But even so, it will only be temporary. Anyway, they should duel now. And without wasting time, Ivan also draws his sword. Now things are going to get really serious. Rika thinks as seems satisfied with the gift, and on top of that, he has gained a master with an incredible reputation. The fight between the two continues, and then the scene changes to that hooded man from before, who says there was a rumor that there was a sword master in that place. So he came to take a look. Luke asks him who he is, and he answers that he is from the Motorola Assassin Guild, and that he has come to ask the Lord's Son for permission to settle there. Upon hearing that, Luke thinks he has heard that name before, because it is the largest assassin guild that appeared 50 years ago, and he wonders why they would be in a territory like this. But there must be some way for them to help each other in this situation. No, saying that, he allows them to stay, but with the condition that they accept his offer. Man, I already realize that this isn't going to end well. Faced with that, the guy smiles, and then he asks him to tell him more about it, and Luke, without hesitation, orders him to kill the protagonist. Look at that, I knew it, man. Upon hearing that, the assassin just laughs, and meanwhile, the protagonist's fight was still in full swing. Neither of them was willing to admit defeat, and Asher charges at full speed and connects an attack. However, of course, it would not be enough to affect the sword master, who considers Asher's skill to be comparable to his own, saying that his movements border on perfection. And Asher says that's what he has to offer. At the same time, Highband knocks the protagonist down. However, the boy quickly regains his balance, and then the man says it's a shame that, apart from imperial swordsmanship, he doesn't seem to have a talent for heroic swordsmanship. He stares at Asher and right after that, grabs one of the daggers, saying it seems he has adapted to the use of tools. And Asher replies that that's why he needs to make good use of these tricks. With that, days pass and Asher continues to train with Haben. But of course, he was also still teaching Rika. The boy says that that woman has much more talent than him. Highband says his personality is different than that boy's, just like his. He only learned imperial swordsmanship, and was someone who only worried because he thought he had no talent. Although he thought he had no talent, to be honest, now he doesn't even know what that would mean. At that very moment, Asher is surprised, unable to believe that Ivan said that. Ivan is a man whom people consider gifted with talent, and who would have thought that that arrogant guy would change his values in just a few years. Wondering what could have really happened, just after that, Rika appears there, and she was very well dressed, and then says that they have a guest from the Empire. And apparently Ivan was already waiting for them, calling them a troublesome little group. A little later, a group of soldiers knelt before Ivan, asking him to return to the capital. Ivan says he hoped the successor to the captain of the guard would appear, and then the other soldier answers that he is busy with other matters. Faced with that, the man ends up accepting, and says he already had that in mind anyway. But what? In any case, they will only leave tomorrow, since today is late. No, once everything is arranged. Ivan says he has been happy to see Leverok again after so long. Also, it was a pleasure to meet Rika, and I am sure you will see each other again someday. All this despite not knowing which path he will take. Upon hearing that, Rika is left speechless, and then a flashback appears in which the protagonist is seen training in his original body. Suddenly someone appears, saying he has no talent, and asks him if it wouldn't be better to look for another job. And Asher replies that he does this because he wants to. If he had planned to fail due to lack of talent, he would have thrown in the towel a long time ago, so she just has to stop looking and leave now. That girl's name is Lafania, who then says she has advice for him, mentioning that he won't achieve anything, and that his talent is pathetic to that point. Seriously, why go that far? He will return to the earth as a third-rate swordsman, and at best, that would be his future. At that very instant, the protagonist wakes up, realizing it was just a dream. But even so, it was a dream of his past life, and he feels disgusted just thinking about it. Lydnia is the youngest sword master that has ever existed, and she said he would never achieve anything. However, he became a sword master at the end of his life, and he was even teaching a girl who has the potential to become his successor, thinking that she was definitely wrong. And at that very moment, Highband appears, asking if he is training at these hours. He answers that he has had a nightmare and couldn't sleep. Then Highband tells him he is awake because he is leaving for the Empire at dawn. They won't see each other for a while, so they should make the most of the moment. Suddenly, Highband changes his expression, saying that he has been traveling the world for the last 20 years to find contradictions and see how the world has changed. But after meeting him, he thinks he has discovered what he was looking for. Immediately, the protagonist goes on alert, wondering what that bloodlust is due to. Ivan draws his sword and attacks in the direction of the protagonist. However, the attack was not aimed at him, but at his back. Several monsters are defeated, and the protagonist is surprised by what has happened. Then Ivan says that this is the truth that he discovered after traveling for 20 years. To make it easier to understand, those things are demons. They have been pursuing him relentlessly, stalking him from before, and Asher asks why they are there. It was supposed that the heroes had banished these creatures from the world. Highband says yes, and that the heroes undoubtedly defeated the Demon King, that's why. All creatures of darkness, such as demons and monsters, disappeared. And that is the truth that the world knows, however. All of that is a complete lie. And those things keep chasing him. They are probably trying to eliminate him to keep the truth hidden. And Asher says, for now, let's take care of these guys. After all, that is the priority. No, the demons pounce on the protagonist. But of course, a monster like that wasn't going to do anything to him. The boy even uses his glove, turning his sword into a spear, and uses it to finish off all the demons at once. Meanwhile, Ivan watches everything from afar, thinking that that movement is such. And as the girl had said, after all, it seems to be the skill of an authentic veteran. And to be honest, it was as if he were seeing his friend, and this boy is definitely not just any boy, which means he undoubtedly has talent. And so time passes, and the two finally finished off all the demons. Then Ivan says he suspected that Asher could also be one of them. He thought he could be a demon, imitating the appearance of a boy, after consuming Hingwoo's memories. And upon hearing that, Asher asks him if he was referring to an imitator. He answers that that is exactly it, but that demons cannot copy the swordsmanship of a human who has reached that level, and that he is undoubtedly a human who reminds him of his late friend. In any case, he is heading to the Empire to reveal the truth and warn them of the imminent danger. And after that, he has to look for the missing hero, although he hoped to be able to meet him again someday. And next time, he undoubtedly wants to have a long conversation with him. Then time passes, and Asher was simply relaxing, lying on his bed, wondering if that guy had really failed to defeat the Demon King. When the world was burning because of the Demon King's arrival, he appeared like a comet that pushed everything back. He was extremely powerful, as if he were a hero straight out of a fairy tale. But like Highband, he disappeared 20 years ago, abandoning the lands and the people he ruled, wondering where the hero could have gone if he hadn't managed to defeat the Demon King. There is no way to explain the peace the world has enjoyed all this time. But regardless of what is happening, his duty remains the same. Whether he wants to discover the truth or not, he will keep wielding his sword. Man, even now, I want to know if he is capable of using the skills of a sword master. Or not. At that very moment, Luke calls the protagonist. And man, I'm going to be honest, that guy was definitely up to something. A little later, somewhere, a hooded figure asks if the leaders really have to accompany him. And the man says that that guy is a disciple of the sword master. The hooded figure says he is just a boy, and to make matters worse, he only knows imperial swordsmanship. But the bearded man says that young man is dangerous because he is different, and asks him to remember when their organization revealed itself to the world. Because whoever brought it to the brink of destruction was also someone who had learned the art of imperial swordsmanship. But then the boy says that it was because your organization was weak, but now it is very different. Not to mention that he will undoubtedly fall at their hands, and mentions that, as the bearer of the hero's legacy, he will not be defeated by something as inferior as the art of imperial sword. Upon hearing that, the short, bearded guy falls silent, and then the scene changes once more to another place. The protagonist was looking at a piece of paper that Luke had given him, asking him to meet in that alley. Our boy knows perfectly well that things are going to get ugly there, but he still goes ahead. Right, and upon entering the place, he asks why they didn't just show up. At that very moment, something appears in front of him, and then those hooded figures from before appear. Asher realizes that it is the Motorola Guild, and asks what they want from someone as inferior as him. The hooded man next to him is surprised and asks how that brat knew who they were. The other immediately confronts Asher and asks if the sword master told him about them. Karo Asher says he already knows enough, thinking he had faced them in his past life, and that back then, they had also established themselves in this territory. Basically, he had found them and destroyed them completely. Man, why so much ignorance? Let's go back to the present. That hooded figure says he only came there to dig his own grave. But our boy just draws a smile, and immediately after he draws his sword, the boy finished off one of them in a matter of seconds, saying that, just like before, they keep babbling, even after having been mercilessly annihilated by imperial swordsmanship. The guy asks him how he knows that, and Asher replies that it doesn't matter all that, since his goal is the only thing on his mind. Anyway, there is only one thing he has to do, and a few minutes later, the scene changes to another place, where a king says, "I haven't seen the boy from the Empire for a long time." The funny thing is that he calls a bearded guy like Highband boy, and Highband answers that more than 20 years have passed, and that back then he seemed smart, but now he is nothing more than an old man carrying the weight of reality. The man says that, as always, he shows no respect for the royal family, and the guy, full of confidence, says he follows the path of the sword, so human authority means nothing to him. "Ops, my fault, there is the best thing since sliced bread." Right after that, the king mentions that he has heard rumors that the rift opened, and demons appeared and asks what that means. Highband says the priority is to find the hero, so he needs the cooperation of the Empire. But the king says that will be difficult. Jai Ben is surprised to hear that, and the king says that that is not the only problem because they are short on personnel. After all, the hero wasn't the only one who disappeared, and Jai Ben, not understanding anything, asks what he is talking about. Then the scene goes back to the protagonist's battle once more, and the hooded figure says that usually he would kill him right now, but that he has changed his mind. Anyway, he better tell him immediately how he knows about his past. Asher tells him to try his luck, and just then one of the hooded figures pounces on him. But of course, the boy isn't going to let himself be caught off guard, right? Immediately, a whole group of them pounces on our boy, but he manages to dodge them all. And incredibly enough, he counterattacks with enormous ease. The guy over there just watched from afar, saying he is using cheap tricks, asking if this is the desperate effort of a weak human. And meanwhile, Asher thinks that gauntlet is quite useful, and it seems he hasn't realized that he has used spatial magic to create his weapon. Right after that, the hooded figure says that Asher will fall before his sword skills. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that this is the swordsmanship of the Motorola Guild, thinking it is a skill that hides its form and moves through the darkness, striking vital points. The boy realizes that Asher already knew this technique and tells the sword master's disciple to die at the hands of this great sword skill. At that very instant, the boy launches his attack, and Asher stayed on the defensive. In the middle of that situation, he finds it strange, because he cannot predict any pattern in the attacks. The hooded figure, for his part, was completely convinced, and the guy kept pressing on the offensive. Asher seemed to be having some kind of difficulty, and then he ends up dropping his sword, saying that it seems he has quite a bit of talent, since it is a style of swordsmanship that is difficult to learn. And the guy says that it is one of the 13 positions recognized by the master of Motorola. Upon hearing that, Asher says that title is pathetic and asks him why Motorola is going after him. And the man asks him, since when do assassins give explanations to their target? However, our quick-witted boy says that, since he is going to die anyway, there is no problem in granting him his last wish. The guy ends up falling into the trap, saying they came there specifically to kill him. All that had been decided by some oracle, changing the subject. He asks if that answer seems satisfactory to him. And Asher replies that it is more than enough, and right at that moment, man, the boy has gone on the offensive. The guy with the weird mouth asks what that was, and our boy answers that it's just a cheap trick. As he said no, the scene changes to another place, and Doc is having a drink, saying that by now that guy must be dead. The thorn in his side has finally disappeared. And no matter how skilled the protagonist was, those guys he hired are on another level. But just at that moment, someone says that they have finally found him. Oh, man, Luke had already seen the crap that was about to happen, because Asher was alive, and to make matters worse, inside his room, the boy was completely calm, saying he wanted to have a little chat. Luke wants to know why he is there, and Asher asks him what he means by that, because it was as if he were saying he shouldn't be there. And just at that moment, Luke wonders if that guy had really defeated the people from the Motorola Guild. which means he probably found out that it was Luke who organized the assassination. Next, the protagonist starts walking towards Luke, who tells him not to come any closer, asking him how he dares to enter a noble's chambers. But the boy didn't care about that at all, and had already drawn his sword. However, that was just a threat, saying that, until that moment, he had ignored his actions. However, this time he had gone too far, but hopes he doesn't disturb his peace with such dishonorable acts. Once again, our boy is very pissed off. Asher drops the sword, and then starts to walk away, saying that this is the last time he deals with him, and hoping that their paths don't cross again to avoid any trouble. However, if that were to happen again, this would be his last warning. Luke remained listening to all that in silence. And man, that little friend of yours didn't seem to be doing very well. A little later, the scene changes to that guild from before, and a hooded man says there has been a failure. The bearded man says he expected as much, since they had been defeated once again by imperial swordsmanship. Just like before, no matter how much he thinks about it, he wants to know who that boy really is. At that very moment, someone appears there laughing, asking if he really believes that boy has any connection with the former captain of the guard, just because he used swordsmanship. Imperial in any case, he couldn't believe that the infamous Motorola Guild hadn't been able to handle a single child. The old man says that his past experiences with imperial swordsmanship were not pleasant, and the hooded man says they were simply outmatched by his lack of skill. Well, whatever. He will take care of the boy personally with the great power of the god Maronia. A little later in the city, a group of people had gathered. Apparently, an assassin had threatened young Master Luke and had entered the town. Furthermore, rumors say that the one who finished off the bandits was that idiot Asher. Even so, they don't believe that he has become a disciple of the sword master, and it is impossible that a troublemaker like him has changed in such a short time. A few minutes later, the scene changes to Leverrock's hall, and Karen says that the whole town could have been destroyed. Leverrock, furious, says that Luke has caused a huge mess, and asks where he is now. The guard says that he has not yet left his room. Leverrock says that is fine, because he needs to reflect on his actions. Anyway, he wants to know how the town is doing, and the guard affirms that things have calmed down, and that everything is gradually stabilizing. Besides, it seems that the opinion they have of the protagonist is improving more and more. Faced with that, Leverrock reflects that he should show his gratitude to Asher, but Curran says he wants to know Asher's true identity, asking if someone's personality and strength can really change so drastically. Leverrock says, Master, I've been guaranteed that Asher is not a demon. However, he is still dangerous, because if he were to use his powers for evil, he would be able to destroy the Arak territory easily. Even so, he fought for them and ended up saving the village, and for that reason, they must ensure if Asher is really on their side, or if he has ulterior motives. In any case, an opportunity has arisen to verify it. In short, they have to observe how Asher will react from now on. Karen asks him what he was talking about, and then the scene changes to the protagonist lost in his thoughts. Suddenly, a flashback appears in which he tells the hooded man to tell him the whole truth, asking him why his god wanted to see him dead. The guy says they don't know the reason, and that they only follow orders because the oracle told them to kill him, and that they would only act after gathering information that he was in that town. Asher says it seems they were planning to use Luke to settle there, and the man replies, exactly, and asks him if he will spare his life because he has told him the whole truth. However, our boy had never said that, right? And then the scene returns to the present. The protagonist wonders what they are plotting. Motorola is a sect that worships the god Maruna, and the leader, who occupies the seat of honor position, receives great power from that god. They expanded their influence using the power of that god, but he defeated them in the past, wondering why they had appeared again, even assuming that this god could know something about his reincarnation. In any case, he will have to go directly to the capital. After all, perhaps someone there knows something about the secret of his reincarnation. At that very instant, someone knocks on the door, and it was Rieka. The girl didn't seem very happy, and then she says she has received an arranged marriage proposal. What is this? Suddenly, at the same time, a flashback appears, in which Rieka says that she is not yet ready to get married, and her father replies that he understands how she feels, yet there is no other choice, because she knows who the person on the other side is. Even so, she has to meet him first, and he could end up being a good person. Returning to the present, the girl says that this is nothing more than being sold to a prestigious family. Asher says they must be quite powerful, and she replies that it is the Count of Belacheria. Our boy seems to recognize that place and wonders if they are really making an arranged marriage like this. That guy is one of the former heroes of the current Lord of Belacheria, named Balbarka Belacheria. They had some kind of connection in his past life, and he, personally, was not that powerful or known, but he was a virtuous man who governed his territory well. Asher asks if the Lord asked for her hand in marriage, and the girl says, of course not. It was his son. The Lord has more than 50 wives, and just thinking about marrying a guy like that gives her chills. Asher thinks that Valbarka must already be quite old, but still he wants to know why his son would be involved in an arranged marriage. Suddenly a flashback appears in which someone says that that is his son. His name is Burroughs, and the protagonist says he has a brave son, changing the subject. What has happened is that marriage proposals between families have already started to circulate, and nobles, but Valbarka says he plans for his son to marry someone he loves, whether she is a commoner or not. Back to the present, Asher thinks that Valbarka is not a typical aristocrat because he was very humble, and that even someone like him succumbed to the reality of nobility. Faced with that, Rieka says she has heard rumors asking if he faced the assassin organization that invaded the territory alone. She says she wants to be as strong as him, and the protagonist says she has a lot of talent, so it is a pity to see her leave. At that very moment, she stares at Asher and mentions that she has one last favor to ask. A little later, Asher was holding a sword and asking if they were really going to have one last duel. Rieka says yes, because after this, she will no longer be able to wield a sword. But before that, she wanted to have her last fight, and she asks him not to hold back. She lunges at Asher, and then her final training begins. A little later, the fight was already over, and of course Asher won. Just after that, another person appears, and it was Venetia, the girl's mother. She takes her daughter by the hand, and Rieka asks her why her mother seems sadder than her. She had also had an arranged marriage, so she doesn't mind, but her mother says she already knew her father from before. But Rieka has not seen that person even once, and says it shouldn't be a problem, since he is from the hero's family and establishing ties with them could be beneficial. Suddenly, Venetia speaks to the protagonist, saying she has a favor to ask, asking him to take care of her daughter. When she goes to present herself in his territory, she will need someone to talk to in an unknown place. And besides, he is the person closest to her. Upon hearing that, Asher accepts the request, thinking that he wanted to meet Balbarka anyway, because he wants to know how much he has changed. At that moment, and Asher and Rieka were already heading towards the capital. The girl, however, didn't seem very happy, and asked why her father had also brought Karen. But then the guard says they are simply the Lord's orders. Next, a flashback appears in which Leverok tells him to watch Asher. After all, perhaps his true goal had been Rieka all this time, which means he could probably have hidden his motives and planned it all from the beginning. After all, Asher wouldn't risk his life for a territory that had always hated him. The only person who really accepted him and stayed by his side was Rieka, and if she leaves, the boy could reveal his true hostility towards them. In any case, they will just observe Asher's actions and discover his true intentions. While monitoring the situation, the guard believes that all this was nothing more than a ploy to win Miss Rieka's affection. And meanwhile, Asher believes that Leverok probably still doubts him. The guard was also pissed off, thinking that if the protagonist tries any mischief, he will finish him off. I think this guy has forgotten about the beating he got earlier. Next, Rieka asks how much longer until they arrive. They can't be too far away, right? The guard says that they have already entered the Count's territory, so it should take half a day. Shortly after, Asher says, the territory of Bellatoria has been isolated from the outside world for 20 years. Rieka asks why, and Asher says he doesn't know. So it is surprising that they have suddenly suggested an arranged marriage after all this time. But then the girl says it must not be anything serious, although she still wants to know why the Lord is called a hero. Karen says that Balbarka was considered a saint, not just any lord. He was born into a very wealthy family and had the opportunity to live in luxury. But after witnessing the harshness of the world through his travels, he decided to abandon the noble life and become someone who takes care of the sick and the weak. The guy was so good that he tore down his castle, sold all his treasures, and used the money to feed the hungry and lend a hand on the farms. Man, this guy is incredible. That is why the villagers admired him for those actions. And that is how he earned the title of hero. Upon hearing the whole story, Rieka says that it is not easy for a noble to live like that, and that he must be an extraordinary person. The guard says exactly, and thanks to his influence, Belacheria became a quiet place with wonderful people. In any case, it is a place they call paradise, without bandits or even murders. But suddenly, a soldier arrives at the carriage saying that bandits have appeared. And I already realize that nothing good is going to come of this. Immediately, Rieka says that Karen had said that there were no bandits there. But the poor guy didn't know what was happening either. Outside, those men didn't seem very friendly. And Asher, getting out of the carriage, says he will take care of it, thinking that those damn Motorola guys might have gone there too. He draws his sword, and at that very instant, he realizes what is happening. After all, those people didn't look like bandits, did they? Everyone who was there was starving to death, and Asher wonders if they really are bandits. Shortly after, Karen appears, saying that that is Lord Leverock's carriage, and that if they take one more step, there will definitely be no mercy. However, at the same time, Asher asks him to stop because those people are not bandits. They are just starving peasants, so for them, dying of hunger or by the edge of a sword is the same. So Asher hands them a bag of money, asking them to buy whatever they need. Man, but wasn't this city supposed to be some kind of paradise? All the farmers leave thanking them, and Karen says that that money was his, but he still gave it away. But to Asher it makes no difference, since he wasn't planning on using it. Furthermore, judging by the direction they were heading in, it seems they fled Bellatoria. Karen believes that is impossible, and Rieka asks what happened. But the protagonist replies that everything is already resolved, so the girl returns to the carriage. Indignant because there are bandits in this area of the territory, not to mention that they attacked them, and that this world is becoming more and more dangerous. Meanwhile, our protagonist was reflecting, wondering what could be happening in that kingdom. The scene then finally changes to the territory of Bellatoria, and our group had finally arrived. They were all looking up, surprised. After all, the castle is quite big. No, Rieka asks him if he hadn't said that Val Barca had destroyed his own castle, and that he lived a life without any kind of luxury. But Karen was also left speechless at the sight. Suddenly, someone welcomes them, saying that she must be Miss Rieka, along with her companions, and introduces himself. He says his name is Burroughs Bellatoria, and that it is a pleasure to meet them. Immediately, the girl asks him if he is her husband, and Burroughs answers that he is. To be honest, it's not what I wanted. Upon hearing that, everyone is surprised. A little later, Asher was in the carriage thinking that that place had changed a lot. The town is completely in ruins, but before it was a clean place with happy people. Rieka asks if this is really Bellatoria territory, and then Burroughs says the atmosphere there has been terrible lately. There have been several murders in the last few days, so they should try to avoid eye contact with the villagers. Upon hearing it, everyone is surprised, and a little later, while eating at a table, Rieka says this place is a false paradise and a nest of bandits. Besides, they are having a banquet while people outside are starving to death. Shortly after, Karen says this is not the kingdom that he had known, and at that very moment, Burroughs appears, asking if they have finished eating, mentioning that his father wished to see Rieka. Karen tries to say something, but the boy mentions that he already knows what it is about, because this Bellatoria is very different from the one he knew. Anyway, it is better not to keep him waiting too long, because his father is nothing more than a monster. Now man, he has changed a lot. A few minutes later, everyone was already in the Lord's Hall, and he, upon introducing himself, says his name is Balbarca Bellatoria. He has heard that they are from the Iraq territory, and it must have been a long journey to get there. Still, it doesn't matter, because it is a small effort to answer the call of the hero's family. Meanwhile, Asher was observing everything from afar, thinking that Balbarca had changed a lot since the last time. The man wouldn't stop looking at the girl, asking her what her name was, and she answered that her name was Rieka. Instantly, the guy licked his lips, and Rieka already realizes that nothing good is going to happen. Then, out of nowhere, Val Barca says that she has a beautiful name. A little later, Rieka was very upset and asks if she is really going to sleep in the Lord's room. Burroughs asks her not to feel guilty, because it is his father's wish that she feel more comfortable. However, for Rieka, all this is very strange, and besides, she wanted to know what that guy was plotting with that strange expression on his face. Shortly after, the scene changes to the king's hall, where he asks his son if he remembers the story he used to tell him when he was a child. He had told him to marry someone he loved, but since he hadn't been able to find a suitable wife, he planned to marry him to the daughter of the Iraq family. However, upon seeing the girl, she seemed more suitable as a wife for him, and he was thinking of giving another one to Burroughs. Man, this is going too far. Burroughs asks him what he means by that, and then his father, quite naturally, says that he is going to make Rieka his concubine. A little later, the scene returns to the protagonist, with Karen reflecting on something. The guard asks how a lord could fall into such depravity, and Asher thinks that the Val Barca he remembers was kind and humble, and that Bellatoria was a beautiful and happy place. But now Val Barca has been consumed by arrogance and greed, while the Lord indulges in alcohol and pleasure. It's no wonder the villagers are desperate and therefore start stealing, wondering if this is really the person he had known in the past. At that very moment, someone knocked on the door, and who was there was Burroughs, saying he had something to say. And shortly after, Karen was furious, asking what had been said, wanting to know if Lord Balbarca was really going to marry Miss Rieka. Burroughs says, exactly, your marriage has been annulled and his father will marry in his place. But even so, Karen still couldn't accept any of that without wasting time. He immediately starts to leave the room, saying he is going to bring Miss Rieka back. Since he can't stand to see her being used, our boy tries to stop him. But then Burroughs says, it's fine, he is a loyal knight, so of course he understands his feelings, stating that, from the beginning, he surely must have never wanted a political marriage. With exceptional talent and swordsmanship, he probably wanted Rieka to follow the path of the sword. Surprised, Asher asks him how he knows all that, and he replies that he has an information network, and he knows the situation in the Idak territory well. His father isolated the territory to prevent information from leaking, and then hired an organization to obtain it all. He knows very well that the Lord did not sell his daughter in a political marriage for personal interest, but because his family is descended from a powerful hero, so there was no way to refuse. Right, all that even though that hero no longer existed. Now his father ordered Miss Rieka to stay in her room, which worried him, so he had her stay in the annex instead. Furthermore, he secretly opened the back door and asked that, at dawn, they take the girl and leave the territory immediately. As for the rest, there is no need to worry, because he will try to find a way to convince his father. Upon hearing that, our boy was still processing everything. He asked if he could know what had happened during all this time. And then Burroughs says his father changed about 20 years ago. He started to brutally exploit the residents, taking all their resources, using them to build a palace, ignoring the people's suffering, while people were starving to death. And his father was drowning in pleasures in the castle, completely ignoring the territory. Faced with that, Asher says there was a time when that man was called a saint for loving the territory and its residents, and upon hearing that, Burroughs just lets out a laugh mentioning that. In the past, his father always told him that he would marry someone he loved. But 5 years ago, when he fell in love with a woman and brought her to introduce her to his father, something unexpected happened. She was a commoner but a good person anyway the next day. The woman he loved was already dead, killed by his own father for feeling lust towards a noble. The mere fact of telling the story was already enraging the poor boy, and he asked if that was something a saint would do. Then Asher says that he gave him his trust, and that, for that reason, he will give him his loyalty. Burroughs asks him what he means, but when he looks to one side, the protagonist has already left the scene and then returns to the Lord, who, as always, was still drinking. He was already thinking about going to the room where Rieka is. However, at that moment, our boy appears and says that the Balbarca he knew barely drank alcohol, and even less a wine as expensive as that, since he rejected it even when it was offered to him personally. Balbarca asks him who he thinks he is, and then Asher asks the guy to say what the Bellatoria oath is. Upon hearing that, the man doesn't seem to understand what the protagonist was talking about. At that moment, he realizes that it was not the real Balbarca, without wasting time. Asher draws his sword and lunges at the Lord. Then, my friend, all you see is blood splashing into the air. And at the same time, the scene changes to the outside of the castle. Rieka asks where they are going, and the guard says they must leave immediately, mentioning that surely nothing good is coming, that greedy lord had her in his sights, and upon hearing that, the girl is obviously in a state of shock. Shortly after, the two were already in the carriage, but just at that moment, the soldier next to her says, there are intruders in the castle, and the lord is being attacked. No one understood what was happening there, and the scene moves inside the castle. Then, after entering the Lord's room, man, you know what happened, right? Everyone saw the protagonist kill the Lord, who was already crying on the floor. Burroughs even screams his father's name, but then the protagonist says that that was not his real father, but a creature that infiltrates human bodies by copying their appearance. To make it better understood, it was a demon, and after that, Burroughs asks him if he means it's a doppelganger. If that is the case, he is completely wrong. And he asks him if he thinks he is so stupid as not to know how to distinguish between a human and a demon. If his father had been attacked by a doppelganger, he would have lost all his memories, and he wouldn't even have been able to recognize him, and he probably would have attacked him. but his memory was perfect, and he still remembers absolutely everything. The only thing that changed over time was his personality. And even though he was a monster, he was still his father, honestly. He thought that at some point he might change. But now it's all over, and he wonders what right Asher had to do this to him. While things are heating up, let's see, Asher remains silent and at the same time. Burroughs orders them to attack him, however, at that very instant. Everyone hears a laugh. Balbarka was actually a demon who said they had discovered him. You're all idiots. And out of nowhere, the creature fully materializes. Everyone was watching what was happening. And poor Burroughs was still trying to process it all, wondering if it really was a doppelganger. The scene returns to the guard running through the castle hallway, wondering what the protagonist had done. Out of nowhere, a group of soldiers goes flying, and then that demon lunges at Burroughs. Quite naturally, he says that it was very fun to kill your dear father, along with your wife. Then Karen joins the fight to defend the boy, ambushing the demon with his sword. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. He keeps launching a series of attacks, and the monster says that. Actually, he is quite skilled for a human, but this little game is about to end, because there is no time to waste with him there, right? The two poor guys are thrown against the wall, and the demon, looking back, asks the protagonist how he dared to discover his true identity. The protagonist says it was because of the Bellatoria oath, since Balbarka always carried it in his heart and always spoke about it. Besides that, this guy had great faith in his people, and as if that weren't enough, he always used a phrase that was his very essence, asking how anyone could talk about Balbarka without knowing that. Right after that, the demon says he didn't know something like that existed, and that, to fulfill his role as effectively as possible, he studied a lot about how he should act. For 20 years, no one discovered his identity. But out of everyone, a brat like him discovered it in just a minute before killing him. He wanted to know something and asked who the boy really was, who, quite calmly, says he is, literally, a master swordsman, just as he had said. His clan was wiped off the map, which, to be honest, was the work of a human who was the master swordsman. He thought he had killed them all before, but it seems there was still one left, and upon hearing that, the demon realizes who he was dealing with, but by then it was too late, and the bastard kicked the bucket. On the other hand, Burroughs lay on the floor, and Asher asks him if he is awake. The boy raises his face, unable to believe that it was really a doppelganger. He stares at him one more time, and the protagonist helping him, the boy says it had caught him by surprise. It seems that thing wanted revenge for something from the past, and Burroughs, looking at the protagonist, wonders how he knew all this at that very moment. Rieka appears on the scene, and with her, several soldiers also appear to help. And so, a day passes, and the protagonist was looking at a tombstone that was probably the real Balbarka's. Burroughs also appears there, saying they built a tomb for his father. They recovered his body and erected a monument in his honor. Even if it was late, Asher gives his condolences, but the boy tells him it's okay. He was heartbroken, but he had been deceived by a demon without realizing it wasn't his father. Thanks to him, they managed to save the territory, and Asher asks what will happen now with the Bellatoria kingdom. And he replies that he will take charge from now on, and that he needs to rebuild the houses that were attacked by the demons, but that he will never be as good a lord as his father. Upon hearing that, Asher remembers that Balbarka used to say that, as a lord he is nothing, and that this place only exists thanks to the people. To be honest, he is not in charge and simply supports them, and that is how true nobility should be. At least those are the words he keeps in his heart, and those he repeats to himself every day. While this guy is a good person, and that is precisely the so-called Bellatoria oath. Next, Burroughs says that the protagonist had used the oath to discover the demon's weakness. However, this is a secret that only the family and close friends share. So he wanted to know how he knew it, and besides, how is it that he is so well informed about demons? Asher realizes that his existence was becoming increasingly suspicious. And a few minutes later, the scene returns to the Lord's castle. Karen says that a demon known as a doppelganger imitated human beings by stealing their bodies, which means Lord Balbarka was also being imitated by one. All this was the work of a disgusting demon. Upon hearing that, Rieka asks not to worry because the marriage has been cancelled. It was cancelled because the demons organized it against her will, and besides, she will also leave there as soon as possible. Returning to Burroughs, Asher makes up an excuse, saying he knew all this because he is the apprentice of the master swordsman. And that actually makes sense. He was a close friend of his father, and if he really is his apprentice, the boy could trust him. At that very moment, Burroughs kneels, saying that he is a great man and that he saved the kingdom of Bellatoria. Then our boy is surprised. After all, a noble was bowing before a commoner. No, the boy in turn thanks him, saying that if he has any request, he will do everything possible to fulfill it. All for the name of Bellatoria, and after that, Asher smiles, thanking him internally, stating that he has undoubtedly inherited his family's humility, and that he will surely become a great lord. A little later, the scene changes to Leverax's castle, where they cannot believe that the Lord of Bellatoria was a doppelganger. Assuming that was exactly what Ivan had meant earlier, he was right about a global crisis. And his words came true, first with the Motorola gang and then with the demons. And to be honest, he is afraid of what will come next, if whatever, they cannot let their guard down. So once again, Asher saved him, and little by little he is becoming a hero, which means it's high time you changed your opinion about him. Wow, finally, I probably don't have to be so cautious anymore. And meanwhile, our boy was listening to everything through the door, wondering if Leverock will finally trust him. Honestly, he hopes Leverock no longer suspects him, since he is not interested after all, much less in staying in this place. So look at that, the protagonist wants to leave after all. He has a lot of work to do. Out of nowhere, the boy perceived a presence telling them to show themselves now, and unbelievable as it may seem, someone appears. The guy who was there said he had heard their whole story and called the protagonist Master Swordsman. There is an intelligence organization called TAPIC, and when Bellatoria was surrounded by demons, Lord Burroughs secretly sent the intelligence organization to maintain communication with the outside world. Then a flashback appears, and Asher says he would like to obtain authorization to hire them. And Burroughs agrees, since he no longer needs them. Anyway, he wanted to know why he needed them, and the boy says it was just for personal use. Burroughs says he feels there is something more to this story, but anyway, he will accept it. The scene then returns to the present, with that long-haired guy saying his name is Kaidos, and that he is the head of the intelligence organization. Our boy greets him and tells him that he is his new boss. And then the man says he looks familiar. Anyway, he had been impressed by his performance. And to be honest, the way he killed that doppelganger with a single blow was very terrifying. Asher says he didn't even notice he was watching him, and the man says that, as the head of an intelligence organization, he should be able to go unnoticed. No, in any case, it seemed the doppelganger knew something about him. So no point wondering what he is going to do with an intelligence organization, or if he is going to send them looking for a nobody. Our boy says it will be the whereabouts of the heroes, because in the past, those they called heroes either disappeared or were completely corrupted. An example is Raypen and Balbarka. Since they had been missing for 20 years, Balbarka's body was stolen by a doppelganger, and the other was being hunted by several demons. Now that the demons have returned, the world is in danger, but they have no idea where the other heroes are, especially the one who defeated the Demon King and banished all demons from the world. Anyway, they are going to focus on the whereabouts of someone called Valorant. Upon hearing that, Kaidos is surprised and says he didn't think he would accept this case. Then Asher asks if that is too much for a small intelligence organization like his. But then my friend hurts the guy's pride, and he says that, of course, that's not true, because there isn't a single piece of data in the world that they cannot find. And once everything was agreed upon, the guy, without wasting time, already gets to work. A little later, Kaidos was pissed off, saying that his pride had made him accept the offer, but that he had no idea how to find information like that. He will have to start with the capital, and looking sideways, he finds the protagonist calling him conceited. Anyway, he is quite an interesting person, and without a doubt it will be difficult to deal with him. The scene changes to another place, and a villager asks if he has heard the rumors since Bellatoria opened its borders. This is good for merchants, as there are more territories to trade with. And the other man asks why they had been closed for so long. The blonde one says he thinks it was the demon's fault, but then the old man next to him says that makes no sense. Demons are a lie, and they died more than 50 years ago. In any case, it is impossible for demons to appear for no reason. They were horrible monsters, and many people died back then. The same thing happened to him, because he was almost trampled while fleeing with his mother. However, at that moment, someone appeared to save him. When he was just a little boy, he could only watch, because those who were before him were the heroes. He only saw them that one time, but even so, he still clearly remembers all their faces. In short, young people should learn to appreciate heroes, because without them, the world wouldn't be so peaceful. However, at that moment, a bunch of goblins suddenly appear and pounce on the carriage. No one understood what was happening, but by then it was too late. Right. A little later, the scene returns to the protagonist, who thinks that the beings that threaten human life have returned. The boy looks to one side, and then sees Ryuka training. He calls her, and then says that everyone is there because of the demons, mentioning that the atmosphere is quite tense. Ryuka says she had only seen demons in books, and upon hearing that, Asher thinks that's true, assuming that the people of this era don't know much about demons, and that creates much greater suspense. At that very moment, everyone hears a scream, and then a seriously wounded villager appears. The poor man begged for help, claiming that demons came out of the forest and attacked his carriage, and our boy kept trying to process it all, and then the scene changes to the carriage, which was already completely destroyed. Asher thinks that this is not the work of bandits, let alone those tracks. He keeps analyzing all the evidence, and right after, Ryuka finds someone unconscious and asks him if he is okay. The old man seemed to still be alive, and Ryuka asks the guards to help him. The man finally opened up, saying they had been attacked by goblins. Asher thinks that, as expected, they had appeared. The monsters are extraterrestrial creatures of various races, and they were hostile, and also a threat to humans. But like the demons, they had all disappeared, which made him wonder why they had returned. Shortly after, the old man had already been treated, and said he was a merchant, and that he was returning from a nearby farm loaded with goods. Out of nowhere, some goblins came out of the forest and attacked his carriage, stealing all the merchandise. Ryuka asks what goblins are, and the man answers they are small green-skinned monsters and pointed ears. Faced with that, Asher joins the conversation and says that they disappeared from the world, along with the demons. 50 years ago, the old man is surprised that Asher knows anything about it, and our boy says he read about them in his history books. 50 years ago, the heroes killed the demons, along with all the other beings that threatened human existence. The passages to the demon realm were sealed, along with the dragons, which were completely defeated. The monsters were driven far from their domains. However, a heroine known as the Queen of the North Sea had the monsters under her control. In her territory, they ceased to be hostile towards humans and lived in harmony with the other races. However, the monsters broke the order of the North and are attacking humans. Furthermore, with the disappearance of Ravinia, the North is plunged into total chaos. Just after, Ryuka says that if the old man knows goblins, he probably knows how to defeat them. But then the man says that he was too young back then to know, and that it was the adults who fought against them. Furthermore, it was so long ago that there is probably not a single person alive who knows that information. And so a day passes and Ryuka, while doing some shopping, says the city is in an uproar. Also, rumors are spreading about murderers and demons. Her father met with the vassals, and none of them seemed to know anything about goblins or monsters, let alone have books with that information. To make matters worse, there is no one who has ever faced monsters, and Asher believes they are all already dead. Like his original body, goblins are a subrace of monsters and can be difficult in groups, but in general they are weak. However, in an era where no one has general knowledge about monsters, these turn out to be completely terrifying, and they keep walking the streets. Ryuka says the city even has a bad atmosphere, and our boy thinks it would be better to quickly get rid of anything that gets in their way. Meanwhile, the girl looked at Asher, and she immediately notices that he had something on his mind. A little later, Asher was leaving his room thinking it was time to go find those goblins. But out of nowhere, someone bumped into him. It was Ryuka. She says she knew he wouldn't stay put, and asks him if he's going after the goblins. In any case, she's going with him. But then Asher says it's too dangerous. Also, if the Lord finds out, he will be furious, and Ryuka says it would be a bad example for the people if he found out. Asher resisted. Also, right now, they can't go through the main gate. The guards are watching very closely, so they're going to use a secret passage she knows. Once everything is settled, a few minutes later, the two left the castle. Ryuka asks him if he knows where those goblins are, and the boy answers that they are heading to the carriage that had been attacked to make it better understood. They will find their lair if they follow their tracks. Without wasting time, our boy starts running immediately, and meanwhile, the boy had a bunch of monsters watching them. I already realize this isn't going to end well, and to make matters worse, there is a goblin that looks very different from the others. Upon arriving at the place, Ryuka asks if they could go a little slower, and the protagonist says they are almost there. Finding the fortress, he says goblins love damp places, and that a fortress in a place like that is, actually, quite common at that very moment. He notices something, and then the two crouch down. There were some goblins on guard, and Asher says there's no reason to be afraid. In any case, they should get rid of those two first of all. At that very instant, the boy lunges at the goblin, taking him down in a matter of seconds. The other one appears behind him, but of course, our boy wasn't going to let himself be defeated by him, right? Upon driving his sword into the goblin, he realizes that the monster was still breathing. Then he calls Rieka and tells her that she is the one who is going to kill that goblin. This is training for real combat, because she needs to know what it feels like to take a life. And with no other choice, the girl grabs the dagger and starts to face the monster in front of her. She didn't seem very happy to do it, but anyway, she does what needs to be done. No, the scene then changes to the lair of those goblins, and Asher says they are savages, and also terrible fighters, but even so, they are very aggressive and extremely dangerous in groups. Then the girl says that they are a threat to their territory, and that is why they must not go unpunished. While observing the situation, our boy thinks that she shows no signs of shock after killing her first monster, which means she has a strong spirit. Then she immediately draws her sword, asking if he is going to finish them all off. But Asher tells her to wait there. After all, it's almost time for the goblins to go to sleep, and they will get into their huts. And they won't come out all night, because goblins are known for their short sleep. But deep. In short, he's going to take this opportunity to move through their blind spots. Upon learning that the girl believes that he knows a lot, and that perhaps he has already faced some goblins. A little later, only one goblin was on guard, and at that very instant, our boy appears behind him, without wasting time, draws his sword, and immediately finishes off the monster. Upon entering the hut, he realizes that they were all asleep, so, my friend, you know what's going to happen. True, Asher thinks he knows it's cruel, but even so, they are still a danger to humanity. Once everything is resolved, the first hut had already been cleared, and now only 2 remain. But when he looks to one side, he notices a hut very different from the others. It seems to have been built by a human, and he wonders if that belongs to the leader. Goblins are barbarians, so they don't have the technology to build a house like that, much less the intelligence to understand hierarchies, to make it easier to understand. They are simply low-level monsters driven solely by instinct. In any case, he has to get rid of this first, and at best, it's just an abandoned house. But just at that moment, he hears a noise, and out of nowhere, a huge trap flies towards him. Our boy is surprised, wondering if it was the goblins who set this trap. Meanwhile, on the other side, Rieka was still waiting for our boy, thinking she should have followed him earlier. Just then, she hears a noise, and as usual, some goblins appear. The poor girl was about to go into shock, trying to calm down, thinking that they were just a few goblins anyway. She should be able to beat them on her own. Then she draws her sword, already adopting a combat stance. However, someone tells the goblins to retreat, mentioning that she is human. That goblin is very different, because it looks like a human, and seeing that situation, Rieka didn't know what to do, wondering why that goblin was so big, and to make matters worse, it could even talk. The monster keeps observing the girl and then tells her to come closer. She stays in a defensive position, and asks him if he really is a goblin. He answers that yes, he is, and that he is their leader, and that, like her, he is a warrior who trains in the way of the martial arts. Upon hearing that, Rieka immediately thinks that this is not just any goblin, but rather a monster with the body and intelligence of a human. Suddenly, the creature starts laughing and asks, since when does race matter regarding martial arts? Anyway, they should stop that senseless chatter already. And drawing his spear, he tells her to fight once and for all. But Rieka, full of confidence, says that he is no match for her, and advances towards the monster. Meanwhile, in the goblin lair, the protagonist seemed to be injured. He managed to stop the trap, but still, he had lowered his guard. Man, a bunch of goblins were staring at our boy, and he tells everyone to come at him at once. What is this? Does he feel safe? In the middle of that situation, he immediately activates the ability of his gloves. Thinking that he has to break through them first, everyone lunges at him, and our boy summons a giant spear. The guy really knows what he's doing, and even if it's not a sword, he knows how to handle it masterfully. Still, he had some difficulty, thinking that the monsters didn't stop appearing. The scene then returns to Rieka's battle, and the goblin says that, actually, she is not bad. Rieka was still processing what was happening, wondering why a monster was judging a human. She launches a series of strikes with her sword, surprised that that thing blocks her attacks so easily. At that moment, the big guy jumps, saying that she is using too much force, and that is why her movements are so unstable. In the middle of the battle, Rieka wonders if this monster is really at the same level as the protagonist. Or not. That is going too far. It is impossible that a goblin knows so much about sword handling, but now he is going to start fighting for real. Using the Ravinia sword technique, look at that. He has already activated the cheats. The goblin leader just watches. And then says that she is also a fraud. Neither I nor the girl understood what the goblin said. And at the same time, the monster attacks with his spear, which simply breaks the Rika sword. He tells them to finish this once and for all. And once again, he lunges at the girl, throwing her far away a little later. The scene returns to Asher, who had already finished off all the goblins, saying that he can't believe these monsters have done all this. Goblins have the habit of coating their weapons with poison, and a small dose is enough to kill hundreds of humans, as that poison has affected him. He thinks he is going to die right there, and that is why he collapses unconscious on the floor, returning to the other battle. Rika had been defeated, and the goblin was surprised that she was still alive. Honestly, that armor had saved her, and meanwhile, the girl thinks she can't move. Then the monster tells her to die with honor, like a human warrior. He was about to land the final blow, and Rika wonders if this is how she was going to die. The poor thing was not yet prepared for this. But just at that moment, something hits the goblin's spear. I don't know how, but the protagonist was still alive. Saying that that was close, the goblin starts to stare at our boy and then says that he is very brave, surprised that he is still alive. And Asher, surprised that this goblin can talk, says he has noticed the habits of his goblins. After all, he is familiar with the trick of poisoning their weapons, and that is why he covers his own weapons with an antidote to be able to survive. Wow, you could have said that before. No, anyway, that kind of preparation is essential when you face goblins. And the leader is surprised because the boy even knows his tactics and mentions that he is actually quite intelligent. Then Asher leans Rika against a tree and tells her to leave the rest to him. Upon getting up, he asks if he is the leader of the goblins, and the monster answers that yes, he is, and that his name is Tarkin, and he is an aspiring martial artist. Asher thinks that that is quite interesting because basically he is a goblin with the body and mind of a human. Faced with that, the monster says that he is the culprit for interfering in a fair duel, and asks if he is ready to face the consequences. Of course, the boy was quite confident in himself and told him to go for it. And without wasting time, the goblin leader does just that. He attacks the protagonist, but he manages to block the blow. The monster keeps launching a barrage of attacks, and Asher thinks that these are not the attacks of a normal goblin. It is not based solely on brute force, but also on movements perfected after countless hours of training and practice. In any case, it has been a long time since the last time he faced such a good rival. So our boy counterattacks, and the goblin goes flying. He says that this is the perfect swordsmanship he had always wanted, and mentions that Asher is truly powerful. This is his lucky day, because he has found humans who are truly decent. In any case, now they are going to start fighting seriously, and they lunge at the protagonist. Meanwhile, Rika was still injured, watching the whole battle from afar, thinking that the goblin's movements have no elegance, let alone skill. But even so, the spear movements are practically perfect, and as incredible as it may seem. That monster looks like the protagonist. Shortly after, she loses consciousness, and the goblin asks if Asher is already tired. Asher says he has no time to waste talking to him right now, but the goblin says he won't let him leave. However, our boy says he knows he will, and at that very instant, the forest starts to burn. The goblin looks back, and then realizes that his village is on fire. Asher says he has to exterminate them by any means necessary, and having no other choice, the goblin decides to flee the battle. After all, he can't let his people burn to death. They will finish this another day, and they will probably meet again soon, and so all the monsters flee, and Asher approaches Rika and thinks she has fought well. After all, she basically faced a superhuman completely alone anyway. They have to return to the capital immediately to warn them that the goblins are attacking the region. A little later at the Lord's castle, Karen tells them to protect the castle. At that very moment, someone calls the guard, and it is the protagonist, who tells him he has something to show him. And upon throwing a sack on the floor, he asks him to take a look. And at that very instant, everyone is surprised by what they see. Basically, it was a goblin, and Asher asks him if it's the first time he sees one in person. They are responsible for planning the attack on the Arax territory. To make it better understood, they will arrive soon, so they have to prepare for war. Instantly, a day passes, and Rika was still resting. She opened her eyes and then sees her father and mother in the room. Venetia asks how she is feeling, but the girl tells her not to worry. Leverax, without wasting time, asks if it was Asher who took her there. But then she says it's not the protagonist's fault. After all, it was she who wanted to follow him. She went with him even after he told her it was dangerous. and thanks to that, she gained combat experience and also became mentally stronger. Furthermore, he also saved her when they fought against the goblin leader, mentioning that Asher fights for his own life, as well as for the good of the territory, and having no other choice, her father finally calms down, thinking that Rieka is right, while everyone in the territory is full of fear and anguish. Asher went out and personally brought a goblin, thinking that he is no different from a hero. And man, I don't know why, but now the soldiers are training in front of that thing. Asher watched it all from above, and Leberok says he ordered them to hang that thing there, so that the soldiers can overcome their fear and become more cautious. Changing the subject, he asks what he thinks of his soldiers, and Asher answers that they are good, and that they will have a chance of winning. Then the man thanks him from the bottom of his heart as the Lord of Arwag. Upon hearing that, our boy is surprised, wondering if he has earned the trust of Lord Leveru, and says he is giving him too much credit. Besides that, he wanted to talk about his daughter, but then Leveru says that she went to the training field to practice. As soon as she woke up, she could lead a comfortable life, but even so, she still wants to make all this effort. The two go to talk to Rieka, and her father asks her if she is okay. He answers that he can handle it perfectly. Leverok says that she is as troublesome as her brother, and she says that it is disappointing to be compared to Luke. He is an idiot who is always hiding in his room, and she definitely has to get stronger instead. Our boy was just listening to the conversation, wondering if he had been traumatized after that day. Whatever the case, they have to help him return to reality. At that moment, the woman asks Asher if he hurt his arm. He answers that he is fine, and that he had only been wounded by a goblin's poison. Rika says it's fine, as he recovered right away because he was already prepared. Asher says that goblins have a habit of coating their weapons with lethal poison, so they must be prepared for that. After all, they will win if they have armor and medicine ready. However, the current problem is the goblin's leader, who possesses physical abilities, and martial ones similar to those of a human, which means it will probably be Asher who will face him. Meanwhile, a group of goblins had gathered in a cave. And man, did you see that? The leader is still alive. He believes that his race is weak by nature and lacks intelligence, and that is precisely why he wants to become more powerful. He has acquired intelligence and physical skills that exceed the limits of the goblins, and that is why he needs to protect his race. At that very instant, a voice begins to resonate in his head, ordering him to kill the humans. To the goblin, that is a curse, wondering why he has to suffer just to gain intelligence. In the end, he is nothing more than a puppet that follows orders, but at least he gained something because of it. This world is full of fakes, and it was the first time he had met a human like him. Faced with that, the goblin stands up, asking everyone to gather, and begins to give a speech. He says they will get rid of the humans, and shortly after that, we see all the goblins attacking the fortress. The soldiers realize that the monsters have already arrived, and Karen orders them to raise their weapons. This is their land, so they must not let those monsters attack it. The goblins begin to climb the wall, but the soldiers were prepared to defend it. Man, the fight was brutal, and it definitely won't end soon. Leverok was also there, raising his sword just to impress, ordering them to stop the goblins and protect the territory of Harak. The scene then changes to Luke's room, and the boy, to be honest, didn't look very good at that very moment. Asher appears in his room telling him to get it together once and for all, because everyone inside the castle is fighting against the goblins right now, but the poor boy is in a state of shock and says he can't do anything, asking how he could help in the fight. He is not as strong as he or Rieka. Also, he is nothing more than a good-for-nothing, and will only be the successor of the Arak's territory on paper. Man, this boy has changed a lot. Seeing that, Asher thinks that his self-esteem has hit rock bottom, but he needs to find a way to strengthen his heart, and by throwing his sword at him. The protagonist tells Luke to take it, asking him if he is going to keep doing nothing, even if the land burns and people die, wanting to know how a coward like him could become the Lord. He is the one who will become the Lord of these lands. That is why he must fulfill his duty. While the boy continues to stare at the sword, and then he finally regains his determination. Without wasting time, he leaves his room. Meanwhile, the soldiers were still fighting in the battle. Suddenly, some goblins appear behind Karin, but then Rieka appears to save the situation. She asks how the battle is going, and the guard says they definitely have the upper hand. The goblins may be more numerous, but their strength and coordination are poor, and the soldiers of the Iraqi territory are managing to defend themselves. In any case, he is sure they will be victorious. Meanwhile, the girl thinks they still have a long way to go. After all, the real danger is yet to come. Speaking of the devil, that damn goblin appears, saying that as expected, it is impossible to let those guys take the castle on their own. Anyway, his brothers did a great job, and now they should let him continue. On the other side of the battlefield, the soldiers were wondering if everything was over. But Karin tells them to stay alert and help the wounded. However, at that very moment, that same goblin from before appears, saying that they had lowered their guard. He attacks several soldiers, and immediately Rieka realizes that he was the leader of the goblins. No one understood what was happening, and Karin orders everyone to attack. However, Rieka tells them not to because that bastard is different. But it was already too late to stop the attack, and the soldiers rush at the monster, who says he has no time to play with them. After all, they are all fakes. In a matter of seconds, the goblin defeats a large number of soldiers, and Karin could not believe what she had seen. The goblin starts walking calmly, asking if she is not the woman he saw in the forest, and if the one next to her is the leader of those useless people. But it is a shame, because he has nothing to do with fakes like them, and orders her to hand over that human to him right now. But Karin asks him what he is talking about, and the goblin leader says it is about the protagonist, because he is the only true man capable of wielding a sword, and tells them, once again, to bring him immediately. Karin says that, of course, she will not do that, obviously, unless she kills him first. Rieka says that goblin is dangerous, but the guard tells her not to worry, because he will take care of it, thinking that he is just an insignificant goblin who could not surpass the swordsmanship of a human. The goblin tells him to come at him with everything he has, and then Karin does exactly that. The two clash their swords, and the guard says he is going to take his head home. Rieka was watching everything from afar, thinking that Karin is a high-level swordswoman, recognized even within the Empire, but the monster acts as if he were fighting an inexperienced child. The goblin says she has the qualities of a warrior, but even so, it is still not enough. The guard cannot believe what just happened, and the next instant he is thrown backwards. Part of his armor is destroyed, and the goblin immobilizes him completely, saying that he too is a fake who relies on tricks. This lunatic really cannot win a battle, but of course, Rieka was not going to let that happen so easily. However, at that very moment, the protagonist appears, and the goblin says he was waiting for him. Asher says he feels the same way. After all, he is not finished with him yet. Our boy draws his sword, and then tells the monster to come at him with everything he has. But the creature says that the human swordsmanship cannot compete with his. There is only one human worthy of facing him, and that is only the protagonist. The two swords meet, and the monster says, "This is the true swordsmanship I had been looking for." Basically a battle of pure skill. And meanwhile, Rieka was helping Karin. At that very moment, Luke appears, and the guard says it is dangerous for him to stay there, and that he should go into the castle. But the boy says that he is the heir to the territory, and that he cannot stand idly by. He may not be able to fight, but he will be with them on the battlefield, changing the subject. He asks where the protagonist is, and Rieka says he is facing the goblin's leader. The goblin says it is very fun to fight seriously against someone without any kind of deception, taking advantage of that opportunity. Asher says he wanted to ask him something, wanting to know what he means by deception. And the goblin says it is about human swordsmanship. Humans honor heroes with fake power, and asks how the swordsmanship of such beings can be real. At that moment, our boy is surprised, wondering if his swordsmanship, which it is said surpasses human forces, is really authentic. The monster then says that he is different because he has managed to reach the purest form of swordsmanship. Besides that, he is the only person they're worth facing. At that very instant, he lunges at Asher, who still thinks he doesn't understand. In short, heroic swordsmanship is not real, but imperial swordsmanship is. He smiles, but then thinks that, obviously, that is not true. And while holding the monster's spear, he says you can tell he is quite intelligent, but that he should not judge human swordsmanship, thinking that it must transcend limitations. Heroes save the world using that power, and no human can reach a level higher than the heroes. To be honest, not even he is a true swordsman yet, because he died as soon as he reached the level he had desired all his life. In short, he is nothing more than an old swordsman who only knows the imperial sword technique, and claims that, for a barbaric race like his swordsmanship must seem quite advanced. However, he is unaware of the true limits of humanity, much less how powerful they are. At that very instant, our boy deals a blow to the goblin, who ends up seriously injured. And the boy, completely calm, says that the goblin is quite weak. The monster falls to the ground in a matter of seconds, and meanwhile, everyone was watching that from afar. However, the creature was still conscious, and after getting up, Asher stands in front of it and tells him he would be dead if the cut had been a little deeper, but in any case, he will not kill him. Now, after all, he will be arrested and tried for what he did, and having no other choice. The monster says that he won. Now he can do whatever he wants, and then Asher says he wants to ask him a question, wanting to know why he invaded them. And the creature says that it is because they ordered him to. The demons were the ones who did this, and they sent him to free his people to invade the humans. Asher thinks it is similar to the last demonic invasion, because even then, some monsters attacked humans under the orders of the demons. The Demon King was the one behind it all, assuming that Guy has actually been resurrected. Then the goblin says that, just as he himself claimed, he is nothing more than a puppet controlled by a higher being. Before, he was no different from any other goblin, but he was smarter than most, and thanks to that, he managed to improve his spear technique. That is why he used to fight against other races to test his skills. However, that did not change the fact that goblins are monsters at the bottom of the power hierarchy, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not overcome the limitations of his race. Then one day, that blessed person appeared, who was nothing more than a high-ranking demon. He granted him intelligence and a superior body, and in return, he received the order to invade the world of humans. But now that he has been defeated, he has no excuse to go back there. Now he is going to see what human prisons are like. And Asher says they will escort him there. Once everything is resolved, the monster is finally arrested. And the soldiers are happy to have won the battle, saying that humans are superior. Rieka says he is surprisingly calm, and Asher says he has already accepted defeat, thinking that, for now, they are safe. But with the resurrection of the Demon King comes the beginning of an even greater crisis. And so a day passes, and the walls are rebuilt. Little by little, Leverok thanks the protagonist, saying he saved the mansion from destruction. And Asher says he only did his duty as a member of it. However, the man says that that is not the only thing he is grateful for, because Luke has improved a lot. And that is good news. He even volunteered to help the soldiers repair the walls. Besides that, as for the goblin, Karen is watching him, but something doesn't seem right. Asher says he has to send him to the Empire so they can investigate him. And then Leverok hands him a paper and tells him there is a message. After the invasion of a mimic and the goblins, the Empire has realized there is a new crisis, which means they will send someone soon. A group of carriages was passing through the city, and the villagers wanted to know who it was, although they assumed it was a Ben. However, the person inside the carriage did not seem to be human. The scene then changes to the protagonist's training. Rieka asks if he wants her to learn Imperial swordsmanship, and Asher says she doesn't practice it for some reason. However, the girl says that every time she looks at him, she is convinced that Imperial swordsmanship is incredible. Still, Asher tells her she will be disappointed after learning it, thinking that in his past life there were many children like her, many aspiring swordsmen who wanted to become his disciples, but he only taught them simple, repetitive sword techniques without any special skill. That is why many left disappointed, except for one boy, and that is why he wonders how he is doing now. Next, Rieka mentions that someone is coming from the Empire, and Asher says the Lord told him. Also, the captain of the guard is also a dark elf, and as soon as he hears that, our boy is shocked. The scene changes to inside the castle, and Leverok was welcoming the group that had arrived. The girl says it is a pleasure to meet him, and introduces herself as the captain of the guard. Arena Basilis, suddenly a flashback appears, in which Asher observes a place wrapped in flames. Suddenly, someone calls him, and it was Haben who said that, in the end, they ended up consuming their own lives. With that, the Dark Elves were completely wiped out, and Asher says they brought it upon themselves. After all, a world crisis almost happened because of the Elder Elf. Anyway, your work here is finished, so go away, asking them to call him if they need anything else. And Haben tells him to return safe and sound. A little later, our boy was walking alone through the forest, and at that very instant, he hears a noise. He wonders what it could be, because it sounds like a child crying, so he goes into the forest. Then he finds a dark elf. Judging by the clothes, she must be the elder's daughter. And although it seems incredible, she managed to save her own daughter, wondering what sin she must have committed to deserve this. But surprisingly, Asher reaches out his hand to her, telling her that she can go with him if she wants. And he asks her what her name is, and wow, who would have thought? This dark elf was the girl the protagonist had saved. Back to the present, the girl had already joined Asher's group, and then Leverok introduces the boy, saying that he is an excellent swordsman who contributed greatly to the annihilation of the goblins. Arena looks at our boy, and then says it is a pleasure to meet him. The two greet each other, And a little later, Leverok says that Asher will explain everything that has happened so far. The two were sitting at the table, and Asher thinks it is very strange. After all, he is basically looking at his adoptive daughter from his past life. Arena is the only surviving dark elf, and his adoptive daughter. A long time ago, the elder dark elf, driven by her hatred for humans, attempted to destroy the world completely, all while using forbidden magic to summon monsters from another dimension. But she could not control the unbridled power of those creatures, so the dark elves were completely wiped out. The elder, absorbed by the creatures, was stopped by the heroes by the skin of their teeth. And after that, our boy burned down the forest that had been corrupted by the creature's energy. After that, he ended up adopting the orphan, and she followed him in silence. But she didn't show him any more affection than necessary. To be honest, he wasn't looking for her love either. After all, it was the humans who burned down her home and killed her family, and she should have held a grudge against them. But it's almost comical that she followed the same path as him and became captain of the guard. Next, Arena calls the protagonist, saying she came at the request of Lord Habond, and that, since he couldn't come in person, he trusted her to come in his stead. Anyway, they get straight to the point. And above all, the Empire doesn't trust him. The information she must transmit is a crucial secret, and even though he is a disciple of High Band, it's hard to speak freely. But Asher believes that all of that is understandable. After all, a boy who knows about demons appears out of nowhere and defeats them. From the Empire's perspective, that must be extremely confusing. Then Arena says that the reason Lord Haben trusts him is because of his swordsmanship, and asks him to show that skill. And on top of that, it's a request from the Empire. Upon hearing that, Asher remains silent, thinking that Arena should know his swordsmanship well. She was always watching him, but in any case, he is going to do what she asks. Our boy grips his sword firmly, and then a flashback appears where High Band says that this boy reminds him of his father. Arena says she isn't convinced, and High Band replies that his swordsmanship and even his way of speaking are incredibly similar. If that's the case, she should see for herself what he's like. And so, the scene returns to the present, and the girl thinks it's impossible for anyone to exist who resembles her late father. While she really sees the protagonist as a father figure, Asher says he is going to begin the demonstration now, and then the sword training begins. Each of his strikes had a purpose, and the girl observes everything attentively. At that moment, she realizes how similar the two are. But of course, they are literally the same person, but she doesn't know that, and that's why she was captivated by that skill. A little later, Leverok was talking to his daughter, telling her that he had received an admission letter from the academy. The captain of the Imperial Guard had delivered it personally, and Rieka, delighted, thanks him for everything. Her father tells her that, with proper education, she will be able to further develop her talent. And since they would soon be leaving for the capital, they needed to prepare. While walking down the hallway, the girl was happily thinking that entering the academy almost felt like a dream. The Imperial Academy is the place that has trained great first-class sword masters, and the most prestigious school in the Empire, where countless swordsmen from all over the kingdom gather. And it would be great if the protagonist could also come. After all, he is undoubtedly the greatest talent in the Empire, and she thought she should convince him so they could go to the academy together. Surely he wants to see a wider world, and meanwhile, the boy continues training non-stop. The boy is disciplined. He kept thinking about his adoptive daughter, and a flashback from an earlier moment appears. The boy says he had finished the demonstration, and asks if she was able to confirm her doubts. But the poor girl leaves hurriedly, and returning to the present, Asher thinks she must have been surprised. After all, she had basically just seen a boy she didn't know at all, using her late father's swordsmanship technique. At that very moment, Asher realizes something and asks her how long the girl had been standing there. She, all nervous, apologizes for having interrupted him. Asher tells her it's not like that, thinking she is still looking the same as before. Changing the subject, the girl thanks him for accepting her request for a sword demonstration. His skill resembles that of someone she knows very closely, which is why she was so bewildered. Apologizing for not being able to explain the situation properly, Asher says he's glad it wasn't anything serious, and asks if she has finished reviewing everything. The girl answers yes. Honestly, she trusts him and is going to share confidential Imperial information. She mentions that in the past, during the era of wars, several heroes protected the world, like the great mage who defeated the demon race. Currently, those heroes have disappeared, and those who ruled the land suddenly vanished after destroying their own domains. Also, as he knows, Balbarka was consumed by the demon race. Among them, the situation in the north is more serious due to the absence of Rabinia. For that reason, control over the region has completely collapsed, and monsters are invading the entire territory. To make matters worse, communication with the archmages and the dragon hunter castles has been interrupted. In short, the world is plunged into total chaos, and Asher thinks all of this was to be expected. When asking what became of Haben, Arena replies that he left the Empire. He had received an imperial order to discover the hero's whereabouts and observe the global crisis. Before leaving, he asked her to convey the situation to Asher, wanting to know what the boy is actually going to do now. Is he not going to help save the world? Our boy remains thoughtful, wondering if she wanted him to fight against a crisis like this. Just like before, in any case, he is going to do absolutely nothing. In any case, he doesn't want to waste time on something so honorable, thinking he is not a hero, and that the only thing he desires is the path of the sword. And that's how it will be from now on, living and wielding his sword. He never had the chance to be a hero, nor will he become one. And the only thing he will do is finish off those who stand in his way. Just after that, the girl is surprised, but ends up accepting Asher's answer, saying that Hyban said that he is someone who never changes, and also said that he would spend his whole life wielding a sword. In that sense, he is very much like someone she knows, and Asher just looks at the girl while she talks. Because she is his friend, he knows she knows. Arena asks him what his plans are now, and Asher says he is going to go to a place called the Gate of Swords, thinking he needs to discover the secret of his reincarnation. And if that guy is there, maybe he can answer all his questions. Arena asks him why he wants to go to that place. And right at that moment, Rieka calls the protagonist, saying she has received an admission letter from the Imperial Academy. So they should go together. And upon hearing that, the girl immediately takes advantage of the situation, saying that she also finds it interesting, and asks him why he doesn't accompany them to the Empire. Asher remains thoughtful, and in the end, he ends up accepting. After all, maybe it's good to spend a little more time together, because at some point he will have to say goodbye to Rieka. Once everything was settled, Rieka was admitted to the Imperial Academy, and then a crowd gathered to bless the girl's future. A wedding was even starting to appear, and the whole small group had gathered there. The family was there saying goodbye, and Leverok asks her not to worry about the territory, because Curran and Luke will protect it. Wow, it doesn't even seem like Luke was depressed a few chapters ago. Anyway, he hopes she becomes the best swordswoman in the Empire. Meanwhile, Asher wondered how the demon race had resurrected. Many questions torment his mind, so he plans to set out in search of all the answers. Honestly, he didn't want to do anything, but those questions will end up blocking his path, so he has to resolve them personally. Once everything was settled, Leverok asks them to be careful when transporting him, and the man, the goblin, is going to be taken. Arena then says to the monster, telling him that he will be imprisoned in the Empire's prison for the rest of his life once the investigation is finished. The monster was stoic, saying he had no other choice since he is a loser, and they can do whatever they want. So after all that mess, the carriage finally sets off, and everyone looked at the goblin who had caused chaos in the territory. Everyone starts to look down on him, and the monster already realizes that his stay won't be easy, but that he will undoubtedly be free. While this guy is very optimistic. A little later, Rieka says she has a question, wanting to know how she came to be captain of the Imperial Guard, because it must have been difficult for a dark elf to adapt to the human world. She says the reason she became captain of the Imperial Guard was to follow in the footsteps of someone she respects. And you know who it is, my friend? Rieka asks who that would be, and she answers that it was the father figure who had taken care of her all her life. Dark elves always hated humans, and that was what they taught her. But after her race was completely wiped out, there was one person who approached her, even though she was the only survivor, a presence without any kind of caution or hostility, and it was the captain of the Imperial Guard. In short, he took care of her as if she were his daughter, and although he was severe on the outside, he was very affectionate on the inside. So his self-discipline was an inspiration to her when she was a child. But unfortunately, he ended up passing away, and in any case, his image remains in her heart. Upon hearing that, Asher naturally asks her if the one she said resembled him was her father. The girl replies exactly, and Asher asks her what aspects of him she respected. She remains thoughtful, and then says it was his swordsmanship, even though her father wasn't considered a hero. He reached another level in sword handling after training his whole life, and she respected him for that. So she wanted to imitate that aspect of her father. After following in his footsteps in sword handling, she managed to reach this position. And Asher thinks that before, he was really an idiot. He was worried because he thought she hated him, but in reality, she held him in very high regard. Just after that, Ryuka says that, if that's the case, his father could probably have reincarnated. And at that very moment, someone appears asking for help, mentioning that he came from a nearby village, and that some bandits are attacking and kidnapping people without wasting time. The protagonist gets off the carriage and says hurriedly that he is going to check everything personally. Ryuka says she will also go to assess the situation, and Arena asks them to take care of that guy. And just after that, the goblin says, "They are demons. This is not the work of human bandits." And maybe she can't perceive it, but he feels a familiar aura, which is probably that of demons. In any case, it's better to be careful. Then the scene changes to that damn village, which was completely destroyed. Asher and Ryuka watch the situation from afar, and the girl asks who the hell would do something like that. When they look to one side, they run into some humans taking people away in a cart. The man then turns around, but Asher takes him down. In a matter of seconds, the other bandits lunge at him, and Ryuka asks if those guys are bandits. Asher says they are human traffickers, a criminal organization that kidnaps people and sells them to nearby continents, thinking that he has faced them many times in his past life. After all, there are places where this kind of thing is allowed discreetly. According to imperial law, the buying and selling of human beings is punishable by death, which means that if he finished them all off right there would be no problem. So my friend the boy starts to finish everyone off, and Ryuka, incredible as it may seem, does the same. Yes, now it is within the law. The guys kick the bucket, and Asher finishes them all off without mercy. With that, the villagers are freed and thank the knights. Next, Arena appears on the scene and asks them if they are okay. And then Asher says that the citizens there have lost their homes, suggesting they should take them to the Empire to help them, and after agreeing to do so, Arena escorts the villagers, and thus everything is resolved. At that very moment, someone calls Asher brother, and the boy, upon looking down, realizes that it was just a boy. The boy thanks him for having saved him. Asher wonders why they were even trying to kidnap children, mentioning that it could have been a great disaster, and saying he just did what had to be done. At that very instant, he realizes something, apparently recognizing that mark, thinking about what he knows about that boy. The scene then changes to another place, and Asher says he would like to talk a little about that boy, and asks if a certain Lord Croaks is the master of the depths of the Empire. The surprised girl asks him how he knows that, and Asher answers that Lord Haben told him. After all, that boy has his mark on his forehead, which means he is the successor to the Lord of the Depths. This man is also known as the Underground Hero, and there is a crack toward the demon realm under the Empire that was once an invasion route for demons. Since the waves from the demon realm can threaten the surface, the Master of the Depths was then entrusted with sealing the crack with a magical barrier. Basically, he is the one who protects the world in secret, but he is also a hero who has to live alone underground for his entire life. Arena says that, for security reasons, this was not made public, but Lord Croaks is also one of the great heroes. He is the one who blocks the waves coming from the demon realm on its border with the surface. And meanwhile, the goblin was listening to everything from afar, thinking that he already understood everything, and that the demonic energy he had felt before came from that boy. Undoubtedly, he is destined to live surrounded by the environment of the demon realm. To be honest, it feels very nostalgic to me. Then the scene changes to inside the carriage, where Arena asks what the boy's name is. He replies that his name is Garen, and that he had been enjoying his vacation before the final ceremony of his session for the Lord of the Depths. Then he ended up stopping in that village when the traffickers captured him. Asher says he was lucky. Warwick says that it will be difficult to live underground for the rest of his life, doing the work of the Master of the Depths. But the boy says that it's okay, because life out here was already harder. In the past, he was an orphan and begged for alms during the day, while he spent the nights in the alleys. But luckily, that place was the passageway that led to Lord Croaks' domain. But the place was full of energy from the demon realm, so normal people couldn't enter. After that, he ended up staying with that old man and became his disciple. And a few years later, his master offered him the position of successor to the Masters of the Depths. He had nowhere to go and respected his master, so he ended up accepting to become his successor. Back to the present, Ryuka says that it must have been a difficult decision, and the boy replies that, when they arrive at the Empire, he will meet with his master and go through the succession ceremony. Meanwhile, our boy was deep in his thoughts, reflecting on how, in his youth, They had served together in Eric's territory, and honestly he hasn't seen him since he went to the Empire to receive the succession ceremony. And he must have aged a lot, wondering if he could see his old friend again. A little later, the group finally arrived at the other empire, and the soldiers were there to welcome Irina. She says that those are the villagers who were attacked by the traffickers, and asks them to prepare temporary lodging for them, to which Garin thanks them for everything. And then he says goodbye to the group. Next, Irina calls the two of them, telling them that tomorrow she will guide them to the Empire. Anyway, she will show them the accommodation where they will spend the night. A little later, Asher was in his room thinking about how much time had passed, thinking that this was the bedroom he stayed in when he worked for the Empire. Basically, absolutely nothing had changed, and sitting on the bed, he wonders why that man still couldn't do it. He has appeared. Kairos appears out of nowhere, and the protagonist says it is very easy to detect his presence. The boy just lets out a laugh, and Asher asks him if he has found any information about the hero's whereabouts. And the man replies that, of course he has, and pulling out a paper, says, "This is a copy of the Empire's confidential documents. It contains the time the hero disappeared and the location of his territories." While the guy is actually quite useful, changing the subject, he mentions that the atmosphere in the Imperial Castle is quite sinister, and mentions that he has heard the Lord of the Underworld has disappeared without a trace. Man, you can tell that doesn't look good. A little later, Asher was eating, and Rieka says she doesn't know where Irina is. It would be nice if they could have breakfast together, but anyway, she said she would guide them to the Empire that same day. At that very moment, a soldier appears, saying that his name is Kine, and that he is the leader of the security squads in charge of guiding them. Rieka asks if Irina isn't coming, and Kine replies that the captain had to leave for some matters, so he will guide them to the academy. Immediately, Asher realizes more or less what is happening, and wonders if she might have gone looking for Crocus. A few minutes later, Rieka was contemplating the capital of the Empire and says the place is very elegant. Big cities are really different, and Asher thinks the reason the Empire had been so at peace all this time was because Crocus was protecting the world from the realm of demons. Besides, with the succession ceremony approaching, it's impossible for him to have just disappeared out of nowhere, and he wonders what really happened. Shortly after, Rieka notices the boy's worry, but of course, he says it's nothing. Waken says he must be missing his home while being in this place. Anyway, they will arrive at the academy very soon, and he will make sure they are comfortable. Asher accepts it all, and thinks that, in some way, this doesn't feel strange to him. After all, it was in the Empire where he spent most of his life. Shortly after, Rieka says that place looks bigger than Ariki Castle, and Asher, feeling melancholic, thinks that it has been a long time since the last time he saw the academy. Basically the place where they went, and he spent his entire youth. The scene changes to inside the academy, and the elderly woman there says that before she wanted to know where Rieka was from, but now she knows she is from the territory where Karen is. The girl asks her if she knows the guard, and she replies, of course she does, since he is a first-class swordsman trained at the academy. Also, she believes there is no one in the Empire capable of defeating him, since he is my companion. So, how are we supposed to tell her that the protagonist gave the guard a beating? Anyway, the academy doesn't accept students without skills, and there will be a duel as an entrance exam, and asks if she is going to participate, and Ritka, without wasting time, says of course. She will, and with everything arranged, the old woman says she will guide them to the duel location. Then Asher says to Ritka, telling her that he has to take care of some things, so he will have to leave for a while. Rieka says it would be nice if he could see the duel, but Asher tells her that it's impossible for her not to pass. Once everything is settled, Asher asks the guard to take care of the girl, and without wasting time, he starts to leave, thinking he has to find the sword gate. A few minutes later, Rieka finally arrived at the test site, and the man says he is the teacher in charge of the new students, and mentions that he won't make it easy just because she is noble, and that, before the sword, everyone is equal. If she manages to block his attack and land a single valid strike, she passes. The man then raises his sword, and the old woman next to him says he is a teacher who used to be one of the Imperial Knights. Kane was also watching the duel, thinking that the Academy entrance test is famous for its difficulty, wanting to know how skilled Rieka was. You are about to see my friend. It's no wonder she is the protagonist's disciple, and when the guy lunges at her, she already brandishes her sword. A few seconds later, a sword shatters in the air, and of course, Rieka had managed to win. Right, everyone was surprised by what had happened, because a student had just defeated. Literally a teacher. The guy is still lying on the ground, and Aiko was trying to understand what had happened. After all, that guy is too weak. The supervisor was also surprised, but still passes the girl. The scene, in turn, changes to the city, and the protagonist thinks that he has finally arrived at the Blessed Sword Gate. That is a famous place coveted by swordsmen from diverse countries, and to get inside, you have to go through 3 gates. Only those with a high level of swordsmanship skill can open them, and when a door opens, another one appears behind it. Many swordsmen tried to open them to test their skills, but until now, no swordsman has managed to get inside. Not even the top-level swordsman managed to barely pass the first gate, and not even Ivan managed to open the last one. The space beyond the 3rd gate remains a mystery. Then the scene changes to that blessed place. Some people were trying to open the gate, and obviously that poor guy there wasn't going to make it. Right at that same moment, Asher appears at the location, and the blonde boy asks him if he is going to try to open the sword gate. And Asher, quite naturally, replies that that is exactly what he is going to do. The other boy says, it won't be easy, because that guy there is the best student at Poynton Academy, and he has been trying for an hour but still hasn't succeeded. Then Asher places his hand on the door. But at that very instant, incredibly, it opens. No one could understand what was happening, and the boy closes the door immediately, thinking that, for unknown reasons from his past life, he had easily passed through the 1st gate, did the same with the 2nd, and even opened the 3rd gate, which was a feat that not even the sword masters had achieved. Thus he arrived at the unknown space beyond the 3rd gate, and back then, he was no one special, just an ordinary captain of the Imperial Guard. That's why he ended up meeting an interesting individual, and upon entering the place, he says, "It's been a long time." Calling that sword, sir, out of nowhere, that thing starts to speak, asking him if he isn't the captain of the guard. And Asher says, it's already been 40 years. This sword is the one he met and spoke with in his past life. And it is basically a being capable of reading the human soul. It can probably answer his questions. And then the sword asks him what kind of appearance that is, how he has suddenly become younger. The protagonist says his soul is the same, but that he has reincarnated into the body of another person named Asher. And for that reason, he came to look for it, hoping to find the reason behind his reincarnation. The sword, accepting to help the boy, asks him to take a closer look at his soul. Suddenly, some strange lights start to come out, and the sword says, it's very strange, because I can feel a sinister energy emanating from your soul. Basically, there are traces of interference from a being with evil power in your soul. Boy, and I can already tell that this is not going to end well. In the middle of that situation, our boy assumes it could be Marovina. Basically, he is the leader of the assassin guild, Motorola, and the most evil being of all. Just after that, the sword seems to understand what has happened, saying that the gods can interfere with human souls, and that it probably tried to steal yours. He became a sword master before dying in his past life, and those who reach the level of experience of a sword master make their aura, and their soul fuse into one, but he died before achieving it, and his soul didn't fuse with his aura. So for Marunia, he has the soul of a sword master, but cannot use the aura, which makes him an easy and highly coveted target. Upon hearing that, Asher says that the fact that his body has changed doesn't mean he is going to be easily defeated by those guys. But at least that satisfied his curiosity, thinking he has to meet with that person in person. Once everything was cleared up, our boy says he's leaving, and the sword is surprised. It has been very fast. Asher says that, unfortunately, he is very busy. He will visit it before returning to the Empire. But the sword only asks to be taken out of there. It is about to go crazy because it has been stuck there for decades. And Asher asks it if it didn't say the same thing in the past, that it had tried to get taken out of there several times, but it always ended up failing, and the sword says that now it is different since he has become a sword master. With that, it ends up convincing the protagonist, who thinks he feels that the sword is lighter. Very different from how it was before. At that very instant, a glow envelops the area, and so the sword is finally extracted. A huge light envelops the whole place, and then the scene returns to the dormitories. Rieka asks Asher what he has been doing until now. He replies that nothing, although he is completely dirty. In any case, he wanted to know what had happened at the academy, and the girl says happily that she passed. The teacher seemed very strong, but still, she ended up knocking him down with a single blow. Honestly, it wasn't as difficult as she thought. And then Kaiman says there are many talented people in Arak County. Once everything was resolved, the girl says she is going to sleep, and everyone leaves looking at the guard. Someone says he has been there for a while, but no one seems to have noticed his presence. Asher states it's because he is invisible except to him, and the man with the sword became a spirit. Shortly after, Asher asks the spirit if it is the first time he sees the human world, and he replies that he remembers having seen it before being sealed in the sword gate. In any case, the door was completely destroyed, but he is glad that they managed to get out healthy and safe. Asher says that's why he is completely dirty, and the spirit replies that at least he is okay, and that he is finally free. Also, before he forgets, he says he had felt something unpleasant. Asher says he is not wrong, mentioning that under the Empire there is a portal that leads to the demon world. Recently, whoever was protecting the portal disappeared, and as a result, the barrier surrounding it weakened, and demonic energy began to leak into the human world. That person is a secret hero who protects the Empire, and honestly, he wanted to know where he had gone. But the spirit says that he is not only perceiving demonic energy, but also black magic, and a force that could destroy this world. The scene then changes to the underground castles, and Arena says the demonic energy is becoming stronger and stronger, and orders them to stay alert. At that very moment, a guard becomes unconscious, and everyone was trying to understand what was happening. To make matters worse, a demon comes out of the portal, asking if they have come to take a walk through the demon world. And returning to the place where Asher was, the protagonist asks him if he had said that he had perceived the presence of black magic. And the spirit replies that it is the power that demons possess. Black magic is the evil force of the world's darkness capable of bringing destruction. And someone is using that kind of thing to expand the portal and spread demonic energy. Upon hearing that immediately, Asher thinks that, if that is the case, the underground has already been invaded by demons. At that very moment, the two hear a voice, and it was Garin saying he needs to see his master. At the same time, Asher appears on the scene, asking what was happening, and the boy asks him for help, because his master has simply disappeared. Then the protagonist explains that that boy is the successor to the Lord of the Abyss, asking him if the captain of the guard was protecting that entrance, and asking him to let them both in. However, the young man insists that they should not do so, because only those who have trained can withstand demonic energy. But the spirit says that he has already reached that level of training, so everything will be fine. Shortly after, the scene changes to that goblin from before, who asks him if he has come looking for him. And then Asher tells him that if he helps him with this task, he will ask the Empire to release him. However, he has to promise that he will never harm humans again, and Tarkin says he is a warrior, and swears by his honor and loyalty. Our boy then sketches a smile, asking that they release the goblin immediately. The guard believes he cannot do it without the captain's approval, but the gentleman is the apprentice of the Empire's sword master. So, in this situation, Asher is the only one they can trust, and with that, Tarkin is free, and he says that this must be the entrance to the underground, and without a doubt, it reeks of demonic energy. While they enter the place, Garam asks Azur if he is okay because the influence of the demonic energy is getting stronger, and it must be difficult to withstand. The boy says he is fine, and the goblin states that it is what can be expected of a true swordsman, since a normal human would have already gone crazy with this level of exposure. At that very moment, the monster realizes something and asks if what is on the ground is not the elf woman. Without wasting time, our boy goes to help her, asking Orion if she is okay, and he realizes that, fortunately, she is not seriously injured. In the middle of that situation, the girl asks Asher what he was doing there, and to make things worse with that goblin, Asher says he is familiar with demonic energy, so he will be of great help. And in any case, they are going to enter together. A little later, while they keep walking, the goblin says there are demons nearby. Honestly, it is an energy that feels familiar, similar to the brainwashing that had controlled him before. At that very instant, Asher says he heard something, and without wasting time, he immediately equips himself with his weapons. Just then, someone lets out a laugh, and then, finally, a demon appears. The girl asks what that thing in front of her was, and if they wanted to play with her again. In any case, they will all end up dead with a single blow, and then she lunges at the protagonist. Everyone could hear the noise from afar, and Garam wonders if something has happened to his master. In any case, he had to check it in person, and Arena says she will also go. Then the scene changes to another place, where an old man realizes that Garin is approaching, and asks him to hurry so they can begin the succession ritual, returning to the other battle. The protagonist defends himself, but at that very instant the demon disappears, and although it seems incredible, that thing was defeated with a single blow. Asher asks who that idiot is, and Tarkin replies that it is a lower-class demon. It's not even worth fighting against it, and Asher asks who gave her the order to come there. She replies that she simply saw the portal and came closer out of curiosity. At that very moment, Arena and Garen appear on the scene, and the demon, upon seeing the opportunity, summons another monster right next to her. The goblin says, "This is a pain," and right after that, Asher is thrown against the wall. The demon was already laughing with a smug air, thinking that it had already won the battle, claiming that monsters are slaves of demons, and that obviously they must obey her. To make it easy to understand, they just have to kill those two, so they can go destroy the human world together. Upon hearing that, of course, Tarkin got furious, asking her if she really believed she could use him with such insignificant power. In a matter of seconds, he lunges at the demon and throws her to the side with ease. At that very instant, an explosion occurs, and then that thing is thrown back into the portal. Arena asks Asher if he is okay, and the spirit says that he pretended to faint just so he wouldn't have to fight, thinking that he probably wanted to see if that goblin would act against the demon. Or not. Just after that, Asher says that in reality he hadn't joined the demons, and Tarkin says that he told him he is a warrior, and that for that reason he keeps his word. Besides that, he also hates that race. And a little later, the whole group arrives near a door. Arena says that this is the underground fortress where the portal is located. Asher says that, since they have dealt with the demons, they will try to find Krokos. After that, Garen opens the door and comes face to face with his master. Desperate, he asks him what happened, because he thought he had disappeared. But then the old man apologizes for having worried him, saying that he is perfectly fine. Asher watches everything from afar, thinking that it has been a long time since the last time he saw him. Next, Kroku notices that the captain of the guard has also come, and the girl says she is glad he is okay. However, the goblin, upon seeing that situation, thinks that something is not right. Arena says that they have come to ask for his help because the Empire is in danger due to the waves of demons coming out of the portal. And kneeling, he begs him to allow him to protect the Empire from the demons. The old man remains deeply thoughtful, and then, incredibly, rejects the offer, saying that he has lived his whole life as the Lord of the Abyss, and wonders how much longer he will have to remain tied to that responsibility. And above all, trapped in this cursed underground prison, things are getting very intense. At that moment, a flashback appears in which a man thanks Asher, who asks him if he is finally going underground, and if it won't be difficult for him to live there for the rest of his life. But the man says that, for the Empire, someone has to do it. He says that the simple fact of having the pride to look his parents in the face, who were killed by demons, already fills him with joy. And returning to the present, our boy thinks that he had really fallen very low. And changing the subject, he asks the spirit what those things were, who replies that they are creatures that exist on the border between the demon realm and the human realm, and that they are primordial beings that constitute the source of power. And the bodies of the demons, besides the fact that the so-called hero of the depths absorbs demonic forms and obtains the power of black magic, the old man then orders the demons to disperse. And one of them ends up heading towards Arena. However, Tarkin protects the girl, telling her not to get distracted and to raise her sword. Yeah, that man is no longer a hero and is nothing more than a monster. Just after that, the goblin shouts at the protagonist, telling him to leave that to him and the elf and to go look for that girl. She and the old man had simply disappeared. Next, the scene changes to another place, and the master of the depth says that the succession ceremony is about to begin. The boy asks him why he is doing it, and then the old man replies that he is very tired. He has been trapped underground for a long time, and the position of ruler of the depths implies being forever tied to the darkness. And honestly, he didn't want to pass on that miserable life to him. However, Garen asks him why he calls this job miserable, since he decided to become his successor because he respected him. The old man says he understands his point of view. After all, the Empire also calls him a hero and says it respects him. However, the truth is that they despise them for spreading demonic energy. Basically, it's a life worse than that of a criminal, hidden behind the title of hero, questioning what was the way to escape this prison, which, obviously, is turning this world into a prison. Meanwhile, Arena was fighting the demons, and the goblin watches everything from afar. He thinks that the girl is impressive, and that it strangely resembles the true art of swordsmanship. The scene then returns to the protagonist, who was looking at a black circle, realizing that it was a magic barrier. He asks if he could break that barrier, and the spirit tells him that he is a sword master capable of resisting even the waves from the demon realm. And that if it's him, it's undoubtedly possible. The boy says he will try then. The scene changes to the master of the depths, who says he will infuse his power into Garim. The boy says he doesn't want to do that, but even so, the old man continues at that very moment. Asher finally manages to break the barrier, saying that is not going to happen. The old man didn't understand what was happening, and asked him who he was at that moment. The boy is freed. Asher tells him that he thought he was a hero, but that, in reality, he is worse than a demon. Upon hearing that, of course, the man got angry and told him not to meddle where he wasn't invited. Our boy defends himself against every blow and then jumps, heading towards the old man. And in the middle of that situation, he thinks the Lord of the Depths is really pathetic. Meanwhile, the old man cannot believe that Asher has broken his black magic, mentioning that he is not just any swordsman. And Asher says he cannot sit idly by while he turns the world into a nest of demons. However, the man, already furious, says that he is no one to challenge the great hero Crocus. He cannot defeat the great power of black magic, claiming that he has fully restored his body with black magic. And then the protagonist says that he is not a hero, but rather a traitor who has sold humans to demons. But the guy simply tells him to shut up, launching his black magic towards our hero, saying that the power of darkness destroys the mind and drives a person crazy. No matter how strong he is still just a simple human, and without a doubt, he will not withstand the wave. However, the opposite happens, and incredibly, our boy manages to counterattack by annulling the magic, saying that, unfortunately, that kind of thing doesn't work on him. A mental attack like that is not going to make a sword master falter. And having no other choice, the old man says he will crush him with brute force. Asher was already in a defensive position, and then the old man unleashes his series of attacks. The protagonist continues to defend himself, and at that very instant, an explosion occurs, our boy disappears, and the old man approaches. Garen apologizes for showing him such a different side of himself, and says he hoped he would understand. In the past, he lived his whole life with hatred and resentment towards demons, and with a determination focused on protecting the world. He chose to become the agent of the depths. He had endured a long and lonely life underground, and it was all for the peace of the Empire. However, the Empire simply erased his existence, claiming that the rift should not be known by the Empire. On top of that, they said he was a dangerous being contaminated by the air of the demon realm. And despite the decades of prosperity thanks to him, they continued to treat him just like the demons. That is why he made the decision that there was no longer any reason to keep waiting in this rift. So he will annihilate these humans who are worse than demons. That's why he acquired black magic, saying that he couldn't pass this miserable life on to Garen, because with this power, he hoped Garen could live a free and unrestricted life. But then our boy appears again, saying he cannot accept this, and the old man is surprised he is still alive. The protagonist stares at Crocus, saying that he had said he wanted to be a son his parents could be proud of, and that someone had to do what had to be done. Crocus asks him how he knows that, and Asher replies that he abandoned the conviction he himself had chosen, and asks him if he really submitted himself to simple demons. In reality, the Empire didn't abandon him. Rather, they trusted him and recognized him as a true hero, asking him to put aside those delusions once and for all, and to go back to being who he was before, a hero stronger than anyone else, asking him to return to his roots. However, the old man ends up disappearing, and a huge eye appears, saying that in the end, it was him, that guy who never changes. Asher asks what that thing is, and it replies that it is basically the master of black magic. Then the protagonist asks if it was the one who turned Crocus into that thing. It replies that it didn't do absolutely anything, and that it simply granted him a small wish. Basically, he wanted the power of black magic, so it gave him some. But since he wants it to release him, it will. Honestly, it had planned to play with the old man before killing him. But anyway, it's fine. Our boy, consumed by rage, lunges towards the eye. But when he attacks it, he ends up hitting Crocus, who says that dying at the hands of a comrade is better than dying at the hands of it. The two stand there staring at each other, and the old man thanks the protagonist, saying that he has freed him, he can finally die in peace, and upon hearing that, our boy remains silent. Crocus says that, before dying, he would like to know his name. Asher responds that he has been calling the old man for a long time, captain of the guard of the Iraq territory. At that moment, he is surprised and asks the boy how he knows that. Asher says that he is his superior, and that, even if he isn't how he remembers him, he is the captain of the guard. The scene returns to the goblin leader, who is looking at a portal. He realizes that the rift is shrinking, and at that very instant, the protagonist appears there. Irina asks what happened to Crocus. However, Asher doesn't say a single word. A little later, the two were looking at a tombstone, and Irina says that, although his mind was corrupted by the demons, his achievements in protecting the Empire must not be forgotten. They are going to build a monument in his honor, and changing the subject, he asked them to go somewhere else. Because Garen wanted to meet the protagonist. A few minutes later, the boy was already all set, and then the Lord of the Depths appeared. Asher says that now he has become the successor, and the boy thanks them for coming. That tomb in front of them is his master's, and Asher apologizes for everything, but the young man says it's not his fault. The master tried to use the power of the demon realm to destroy the world, and undoubtedly that wasn't the person he had known. On the contrary, he thanks him for helping him recover his sanity. Shortly after, a flashback appears with Crocus, saying he thought he recognized that sword technique, and that he was undoubtedly right, and Asher asks how someone like him ended up like that. He replies that the demons took advantage of him in a moment of weakness, and corrupted his heart, and that he supposed that, after all, he was only a weak human. Honestly, he wanted to be strong like the captain, and at that very moment, Garam appears, and then the old man apologizes for everything. Anyway, they are going to start the succession ceremony, even if it is late. Even Garam, although reluctant, accepts, and with a smile on his face, the old man says that it has been a pleasure to meet the protagonist. First of all, he wanted to speak alone with his disciple, asking that they leave him alone with him. Asher agrees with everything, and says he hopes they will see each other again one day. Returning to the present, our boy was deep in his thoughts, and Garen says that, even so, it is not easy to overcome those feelings. The boy was feeling really terrible, and just at that moment, a demon appears. With total naturalness, she says she has brought some of the master's study books, and is surprised to see that Irina and the protagonist were also there. Irina was about to unsheath her sword, but the boy tells her that there is no need to worry, because that demon has now decided to work as his assistant. She says that when the rift closed, she had nowhere to go and had to hide. But incredibly, her master didn't kill her and simply took her in. Honestly, they treated her badly in the demon realm, so staying like this with her master is much better. Our boy just observes the conversation, and then Garam tells them to take care. And once everything is sorted, a little later, they leave the lower part of the castle, and Irina asks if it's not dangerous to turn a demon into his assistant. And Asher replies that even though she may have done some things, she doesn't have the strength or malice to harm people. In addition to having someone to accompany him, Garam will help him escape loneliness. And he is right about that. At that very moment, Cain appears with a group of soldiers saying that he has come to escort the protagonist. Suddenly, they kneel, and they ask the boy to accompany them because the great emperor wanted to meet him personally. Shortly after, Asher was already greeting the great emperor, and the man asks him to lift his head, saying that he values his achievements very much. Apparently, he is the only person he can trust. Now, after all, the so-called heroes are falling and disappearing one by one. In any case, he must reward him for saving the empire, and as a token of his gratitude and trust, he will grant him this reward. A group of guards begins to bring in a box, and the king says that he seems like the perfect person to possess this object. Asher was curious to know what it was, and after opening the box, the scene changes to a later moment. The spirit asks what exactly the emperor gave him, and Asher replies that it was the empire's box, basically a rare weapon inherited from the ancient emperor, and that he had heard rumors about it, but that it was the first time he had discovered something like that. The spirit is surprised that the king has given him something so valuable. Shortly after, Reika and Cain appear, saying it's incredible that Asher has managed to meet someone whom almost no one could get close to. And our boy, meanwhile, thinks that the time has finally come and calling Reika. He tells her that he has something to tell her. Shortly after, the girl tells him she is leaving suddenly. While she accepted it so easily, our boy says he doesn't know when he will see her again. So he asks her to focus on her studies. After all, there is something he has to do, thinking that he is going to take care of everything that bothers him. Shortly after, the girl leans on our hero's shoulder, asking him not to die. Wherever he goes, he looks at his companions, thinking that it was good to have known Irina, and thanking her for everything that has happened up to now. With everything sorted out, he leaves the castle, and Rieka says that nothing bad will happen. He is very strong and obviously will survive wherever he goes. At the same time, a flashback appears in which the protagonist says he will be a little late. asking them to lock the doors and take good care of the house. Irina thinks that the image of her father going to the battlefield as if nothing was wrong hasn't stopped coming to your mind since that fateful day. Shortly after, the spirit asks where they are going, and Asher responds that they are heading to the kingdom of Gravia. Basically, it is a place ruled by an old friend of his. According to the information, apparently the kingdom has fallen. And right after that, Tarkin appears. Asher says that it seems like he is free now. And the goblin says that fortunately he kept his promise. That is why he will undoubtedly remember the boy. And blindly, they will meet again to fight again. When that happens, he will undoubtedly defeat him. And Asher says he will be prepared. The two stare at each other one last time. And then the goblin leader runs towards the forest. The spirit says that monsters are also enemies of humans, and asks if it is really okay to let him go like that. But the protagonist says that he had promised not to harm humans, and since he is a warrior, he will undoubtedly keep his word. Our hero walks through the forest, and meanwhile, Kairos observes from above, thinking that he is undoubtedly a mysterious boy, and that he had been investigating his past, and that he is the adopted son of the Lord of Arak. And he used to be a troublemaker, causing all sorts of problems, but suddenly he became a sword master overnight, and he was even recognized as a disciple by a sword master. He has achieved great feats in a short time, and it is very hard to believe, wondering if it is possible for someone to change so much. In any case, he has been suspicious of him since they started working together. To be honest, he had always been curious about his true identity, until he found some very interesting information, wondering who the protagonist really is. Man, the pieces are starting to fit for Kaidos. A few minutes later, the spirit asks what kind of place the kingdom of Gravia is. Asher responds it is a kingdom ruled by a great magician, and a hero who protected the world with his transcendental magic after the war, received lands from the emperor, and founded that place. It was brighter and more splendid than any other place. Basically, they called it paradise on earth. But he heard that the kingdom fell, and that the great magician simply disappeared. The spirit appears and asks if it fell like the ruler of the abyss. And the protagonist says that they cannot say for sure at this moment. Meanwhile, some hooded figures were observing everything from afar, and Asher says that they should go there and see it with their own eyes to find out. At that very moment, the bandits appear. But our boy was already on guard, and then he counterattacks immediately, upon realizing that it was the Motorola Guild. And just as he had said before, followers of the goddess Maronia at that very instant. Someone says that, as expected, they are not easy prey, calling the boy the brat of the imperial sword, and tells him to surrender and offer his life to the goddess. Asher says that anyway. He already planned to hunt down that false god of theirs, and orders them to take him to where she is found. Upon hearing that, of course, the bandits got angry and lunged at the young man. He did the same, knocking down a considerable number of them, but they still don't give up. And a little later, Asher shouts at one of the group members, telling them that if they don't want to be harmed any further, they should bring him the Maronia. However, the guy says that is quite unlikely, because before that happens, he will die at his hands. Seeing the situation, Asher thinks that he has finally given himself away, and mentions that his swordsmanship is much better than before. This is the guy who attacked our hero in the past, and confidently claims that he is going to finish him off. At the same time, a huge explosion occurs, and then someone says that they are blocking the path. The one who was there was Ivan, who is surprised that Asher is there. Then he immediately realizes that it was the Motorola group that was attacking the boy. Anyway, those assassins dared to lay a hand on his disciple, and at that very moment, Asher asks him to wait a bit, saying that if the assassin doesn't want to die, he should quickly say where their base is. Once the whole mess is resolved, Ivan says, "It's been a long time, but even so, Asher hasn't changed at all." Changing the subject, he asks if Rieka is okay, and he replies that she is, since she has even enrolled in the academy. By chance, he is also heading to the Empire, so maybe he will visit the girl, assuming that if he brought her Maronia's head, the Emperor would be pleased. And then the spirit asks if this man is really a sword master. He undoubtedly recognizes this aura. And just after that, the two find themselves before a door. Ivan is surprised that they actually have a base near this forest. But anyway, they are going to finish them all off in one go. However, at that very moment, another person appears, welcoming them to the Motorola sanctuary. In the middle of that situation, Asher seems to recognize that girl, thinking that she is still alive. Next, she descends to the ground, saying that it has been a long time since she last saw Haben. She takes off her hood and asks if he doesn't remember her face, mentioning that, thanks to the gods, She has obtained an immortal body that even surpasses that of a sword master, and asks if he thought she would die like the captain of the guard. Meanwhile, Asher thinks that there is a Motorola group guided by a divine revelation. In the past, Ivan received orders from the Empire to carry out a large-scale operation to wipe out this guild. And after long battles, they defeated all the members except for one called Sebenat. Somehow she managed to survive, and when she found herself cornered, she found a way to disappear without leaving a single trace. Still, he was surprised that she appeared right at that moment, and then the girl says that she has nothing to do with him. But with his disciple, Asher, without wasting time, raises his sword, but then Haben stops him, saying that he himself will take care of her. After all, this has to be resolved once and for all. And at that very instant, the two swords clash. Sabana asks if he really wants to fight her, and Haben replies that he will exterminate her entire guild. The fight continues, rolling on the ground, and Asher thinks it is surprising that the woman can defend herself against a sword charged with aura. Just after that, she tells him that he shouldn't underestimate divine power, because they are ignoramuses who don't believe in the gods, and asks if he thinks he could overcome the power of the great divinity. Their swords clash once more, and Haben, with total calm, says that she is too fanatical at that moment. The boy activates his tricks and sends the poor girl flying, telling her not to underestimate him, mentioning that the only thing she was doing was running away, and now she dares to challenge him, while relying on the power of her god, asking if she thinks a sword master is a joke. However, the girl tells him that his era of heroes had already ended, and casting a spell. She says that they will kneel before the power of the divine. Wow, that's not going to bring anything good, and Haben asks her what she was trying to do. At the same time, the man feels something and realizes that he cannot breathe. The spirit says that it is divine power, which suppresses superhuman strength. And incredibly, it was also affecting the protagonist. The girl was already completely convinced, saying that some inferior beings dared to challenge the great god. Then she kicks Ivan, and the poor guy goes flying. She also approached Asher, and tells him to consider himself lucky to be able to join her group. Either way, it will end without pain. And then our boy tries to say something. She approaches Asher to hear what it was, and taking the opportunity, Asher tells her that she has lowered her guard, and then, my friend, that was all he needed to end the fight. The girl falls to the ground, wounded, and Asher says he doesn't know how she managed to defeat Lord, and bam, with her power. But apparently, unfortunately for her, it doesn't work on him. The woman gets up, saying, don't think that he has already won, and mentions that the boy has been marked by the divine. He will be tormented until his last breath, and the will of the great divine will always stand in his way. Then Asher draws his spear, and the fight finally ends. The boy says that doesn't change anything, thinking that they have played with his destiny and have recklessly harmed those around him. Obviously, they are going to pay dearly for it, and suddenly, Haben regains consciousness. The man says that it is truly humiliating to be defeated by such a miserable attack, and Asher tells him to rest a little. Out of nowhere, someone says that the protagonist has come far, and that he is a human with the soul of a sword master. Asher wanted to know where that voice was coming from. Hey. And then he says that he will enter the sanctuary first. There could still be assassins in the area, and without losing time, he starts running. The spirit asks if something is happening, and Asher replies it seems he didn't hear it either. What he had just heard was the voice of the goddess Morabina. And when he got there were more hooded figures. They charged at the boy, who then summons an axe. Finishing them all off, and he continues forward, the spirit says it senses movement ahead. And shortly after they approach a door, Asher forces it open, and then he finds someone sitting on a throne. The old man says he has come a long way, and Asher is surprised that he is still alive. His name is Bakrosa, and he is basically the leader of everything. However, he is sure that he killed him at the time. The leader, however, says that this is only a borrowed body, but that he is still Marabuna. While so he is actually a man, Asher says they have finally met. But that doesn't matter, because now they are going to settle things. However, the guy asks him to wait because he has no intention of fighting him, since he has lost all his power and is completely ruined. The only thing he did was to deposit his power in his followers to capture him, but everything ended in failure. As a result, he is in this state, barely staying afloat in a borrowed body. And upon hearing that, Asher asks if it was he who reincarnated him, but he quickly says he didn't, and that the only thing he managed was to identify the nature of his soul. Furthermore, he tried to steal it, because a human soul that reached the realm of a sword master could save the gods, and then Marabuna tells him to be careful from now on, because he is not the only one looking for his soul. The scene changes to another place, and Irene was reviewing a pile of documents. But even so, she wanted to know if Asher was okay. And at that very moment, Kenny appears in the room, saying that the Knights of the Sun God are there on the other side of the castle. A carriage stopped, and from it a girl got off. She seems to be a mage, who says that the person the Sun God is looking for is probably in that place. A few minutes later, that girl says it has been a long time since she last saw Arena, who asks what the Sun Priestess called Bersha was doing there. This is the most powerful religion in the Empire, and the saint known as the Divine Reincarnation. With the power granted by the Sun God, she leads the Order of the Sun God, which is the Church's own army. However, she is known for her aggressive evangelism, and is considered a very arrogant religious group. Just after that, the girl says she has heard a rumor that, a few days ago, the Empire was about to be attacked by demons, and that a swordsman named Asher prevented all that disaster, and asks where he is now. The scene then returns to the protagonist, and the god says that gods are incomplete beings. Each of them maintains its existence and obtains power through human faith. And when humans lose faith, the gods lose their power and end up disappearing. But since he has the soul of a sword master, he could free the gods from their dependence on humans, thus becoming self-sufficient and obtaining omnipotent power along with eternal life, basically detaching themselves completely from humans and wondering how it is possible that no god desires that. Upon hearing that, Asher says it is pure arrogance because he depends on humans and yet still wants to rule them. However, the man says that back in the day, he led the faithful followers of Motorola. He had given them his power to capture the protagonist, but they ended up failing and leaving him in this pitiful state. Then Asher says it was a fitting end for his arrogance and asks if they should put an end to this. At that moment, the old man laughs, saying he is looking forward to their final battle. At that very instant, the ground begins to shake, and then the place was about to collapse. The old man says he will regain his power through his soul, asking Asher to offer his life to the great Marabuna. At the same time, the old man is hit by an attack, and Asher was trying to understand what was happening. The one who had appeared there was Haben, who tells them to get out of there quickly. Then the man activates his aura, and they easily get out of the underground. The scene returns to the hall where the priestess was, and she asks them to give her any information they have about the protagonist. Upon hearing that, Arena wonders why the woman wants to know Asher's whereabouts. Who knows what she might do next? And of course, she is not going to hand over the information, asking her who she thinks she is to dare to give orders against the Empire, and talk like that about a national hero, ordering her to leave the room immediately. And upon hearing that, the priestess is surprised, but anyway, she agrees to do so. After all, they don't want to provoke a conflict with the Empire over this. She leaves the place, and Arena asks why they want to know where Asher is, and the girl says they don't know why either. After all, the only thing they do is follow the orders of the Sun God, but they must keep in mind that they will find Asher somehow, because the Sun God's orders are absolute, and so everyone leaves the room. A few minutes later, Arena wonders why the Sun God is pursuing Asher. So a little more time passes, and Ryuka was studying, saying that the Academy's studies are not easy. Before she thought she only had to focus on the art of the sword, but there are many subjects to address, and she wonders why she has to study these things. And look, the protagonist also appeared in the book. At that very moment, someone knocks on the door saying that Arena was calling her. Ryuka finds it very strange. After all, it's the first time she has had a private meeting with Arena. The girl says there is a reason she called her, because she wanted to know more about Asher, thinking that the Sun God is a being capable of seeing anyone's soul, which means he probably saw something in our boy. It would be useful if she could share some information. And Ryuka agrees, but still wants to know why she is so curious. At that very moment, someone appears in the room and Arena asks who it was. The one who was there was Kairos, who says he is just an agent of the information network, and asks if she might have heard of them before. The secret intelligence group had been hired by Burroughs, but now in Prague. Isn't it true that they are at Asher's service? Upon hearing that, Ryuka is surprised, and Kairos says that Asher had told him to find out the hero's whereabouts, and had given him a very strange order. Besides that, he also felt curious about the protagonist, and asks her to continue with what she was saying. Thus, the scene changes to another place, with Asher saying that he had seen Haben's aura, and honestly, he even started to doubt if that was the true sword master. Besides that, he had said something before, because it was as if he doubted his own strength. Ivan had always firmly believed in his own talent, and thanks to that, he had been able to become a sword master. But now, for some reason, he seemed to have lost that confidence. Yesterday, he also said something similar, mentioning that the doubts he had for a long time are starting to dissipate little by little. And honestly, I'm starting to doubt if your current self is really at its best. Our boy keeps listening to what the man says, and then says that he is just a weak human. If it hadn't been for your help, he would have been crushed and would have died down there, claiming that true mastery of the sword consists of surpassing human limits. And he protected the world and saved countless lives with that power, asking if that is not already sufficient proof that he reached true mastery of the sword. After that, the group thanks him for everything, and returning to the present, Asher says that he still had that dejected expression. The spirit says that the guy is right, because wielding the sword means mastering oneself. But your power is closer to something unknown. It even seems that something interfered, creating an artificial force. The fact that he was affected by the god's energy proves that his power is unstable. And it doesn't seem that he reached that power through long training, like you did. Asher says that, at this moment, he has not yet reached that level, and that he is just an ordinary person who knows how to use imperial sword techniques, thinking that if he could regain his power, maybe he would be able to surpass the limits of this body. At that very instant, the priestess from before appears. The scene moves back to the castle once more, and Kairos asks her if she has analyzed the characteristics of the goblins and prepared countermeasures. Rick replies yes, but not even the elders knew that information. In short, it's as if the protagonist had lived through wars of the past. Kairos asks what Irina was thinking about, and she replies nothing. But the boy insists that she tell him, asking her why she is suddenly curious about the protagonist's whereabouts. She says that actually the sun god is pursuing him, and that for that reason. They have to find out why. The scene returns to our boy, who had finally met with that priestess. Man, I already realized that this is not going to end well. The protagonist wonders who that woman was, and judging by her appearance, she must be a priestess of the sun god order. He knows what he is talking about. Anyway, he wants to know why she is there. Suddenly, the girl drops her staff, and taking the boy's hand, asks if he could help her. Asher was trying to understand what was happening there, and a few minutes later, the girl explains everything, and Asher asks if she is saying that a nearby town was attacked, and they captured the residents. She tells him that they are about to sell dozens of farmers to traffickers, and that is why she needs his help. Observing the situation, Asher already has a rough idea of who it could be, saying that she seems to be a priestess of the sun god order, and asks if it wouldn't be better to ask for help from the knights of her order. They say that, since their order is the largest religious group in the empire, it also has a large military force. But upon hearing that, the girl remains silent, saying that they are busy with other matters, and they don't follow her orders. And with no other choice, the boy decides that he will help her, thinking that he should take this opportunity to finish off that damned group. He asks her to take him to where the traffickers are. Then the girl gets up, saying she had forgotten to introduce herself, and mentions that her name is Berkia. A little later, Asher thinks he has heard that the sun god order is an oppressive religion. But surprisingly, this girl is very humble, shortly after they finally find the place. And Asher thinks that these are not the same bandits he had run into before. Anyway, it's better to resolve this as soon as possible. He calls the girl and tells her that he has to ask her a favor. Meanwhile, the guards continue their patrol. Suddenly, one of them looks to the side and comes face to face with our hero, telling him that he is nothing but a brat. The guards face Asher and ask him if he even knows where he is. And at that very instant, the protagonist raises his sword, finishing off everyone in front of him with a single blow. A huge explosion occurs in the midst of it all, and the spirit says it was incredible and asks if he has already recovered his aura. And Asher replies it's not aura, but the divine power of the sun god priestess. The priestess herself doesn't have offensive skills, but she has the power to heal wounds. Besides that, she can also temporarily maximize a person's strength with that. For a short period of time, he can exert power equivalent to that of a sword master. What is this? Is this madness? Shortly after, Berkia says she knew her eyes weren't deceiving her, but still, she didn't expect him to be so powerful. The boy says it's all thanks to her help, and a few minutes later, the scene moves inside a cave. Asher says this doesn't look like any ordinary underground prison, and she replies that it looks more like the temple of a religious sect. At that very moment, a shadow appears asking who has dared to cause a disturbance in this sacred sanctuary. The man is finally revealed, and the protagonist, drawing his sword, says it would be better to release the villagers immediately. However, the masked man says that they are the saviors with the power of the great God. In short, they are going to liberate the people and turn them into the true saviors of this world. How crazy. Next, Berkia says she doesn't know what order they belong to, but that attacking innocent villages is unforgivable. They are nothing but simple bandits. And upon hearing that, the masked man asks if her sun god order really has the right to criticize them. After all, they are a fanatical group that has destroyed countless ordinary citizens under the label of heretics. But that won't matter anymore, because the era of the obsolete gods has finally come to an end. At that very instant, a bunch of torches are lit, and the masked man says that soon the new god will descend upon this world. Wow, a bunch of people were piled on top of each other, and the masked man says that the true savior is about to arrive. The two are horrified at the scene before their eyes, and Asher cannot believe that their group was doing this to people. It truly is an extremely cruel act, and upon hearing that, the masked man just laughs, saying that, for the salvation of many, the sacrifice of a few is, unfortunately, inevitable. This will be a reward for the gods, as they must be honored. At that very instant, an enormous darkness appears in the sky, and the priestess realizes something, saying that the energy of the altar is penetrating the man's body, and without moving a single muscle. Asher believes that all of this was done to summon that thing. Aberrations are monsters from another dimension that are neither divine nor demonic. They are completely hostile toward human beings and possess a transcendental power capable of destroying an entire city. In the past, a person who worshipped the power of the aberrations tried to use forbidden magic to summon them with the intention of causing the fall of humanity. And as a result, Orion, their homeland, the Dark Elf Forest, was completely annihilated. Then the huge monster transforms completely, and the spirit says they must stop this before its true form descends into this world. At this moment, that man has only absorbed a small part of the power, and Asher thinks that when he fought an aberration. Although it was in the past, it took at least 2 sword masters just to contain it, and he wonders if at this moment he could face an aberration alone. The man then grew to be at least 3 meters tall, saying that the time for judgment had arrived. He prepares his attack. However, it has no effect because the priestess defended him. At least the poor girl is good for something, and then she says she will try to contain it somehow. But Asher, meanwhile, thinks that it is going to be quite difficult, and that he probably won't withstand the power of the aberration with just a barrier. And indeed, my friend, the barrier is simply shattered in a matter of seconds. The girl is shocked by what has happened, and the protagonist, without wasting time, grabs her to dodge the attack, thinking that, at this rate, he will definitely not have a single chance to win. If that is the case, there is no choice but to resort to divine power once again, asking the girl to bless his weapon. He is going to jump straight in and strike his vital point. However, the girl says that it is too dangerous. Still, our hero was determined to do it, and asks her to lend him her strength once more. And with no other choice, the girl does what Asher has asked her. Without wasting time, he wields his empowered weapon, charging at that shadow, and manages to drive the weapon into the monster's chest. However, the darkness was very powerful. He couldn't release his weapon and was almost devoured by that cursed darkness. But I don't know how, the boy somehow finds a way to get around it all. And then he cuts through the monster. Incredibly, he managed to defeat it, and even Asher couldn't believe what he had done. Once the battle is over, the priestess begins to heal the boy, saying that it had finally come to an end. Asher thanks her for healing him, and the priestess says it is she who should thank him, because he had saved everyone. All the villagers perished, but thanks to him they avoided an even greater disaster. In any case, they must pray for the souls of the villagers, asking that they all rest in peace. Yes, this girl is really very nice. A day passes, and the priestess says that she hadn't even asked him his name, and asks him his name, since he will be remembered forever as a hero of the Sun God Order. When Asher was about to say his name, he changes the subject, saying that he will tell her when they see each other again, because he plans to visit the Great Sun God Church soon. Upon hearing that, the girl says she understands, so, from today on she will remember his face very well. Then she gives the boy a necklace, claiming that it is a symbol of the Sun God, and a reward she gives him, which will undoubtedly be very useful to him. And just after that, Asher thanks her for everything. A little later, the priestess had already left, and suddenly someone calls her. The man asks if she has a moment, and upon entering the tent, he kneels, saying that he greets the great Saint Berkia, but she tells him that there is no need for formalities, and asks if the work he carried out without her permission has already been finished. With a smile on his face, the man replies, yes, mentioning that the Probelli swore their faith to the sun god, and that with it, the influence of the church grew much more. Upon hearing this, the saint asks what is the point of forcing conversion through violence, since blindly many lives were lost in the process. However, the young man warns her that she should not lament the death of the heretics, and asks if by chance she is feeling empathy for those inferior beings. In any case, what the saint currently lacks is determination. The same happened in the Empire, since she failed to obtain any information about the protagonist after letting herself be intimidated by a simple captain of the guard. In short, she should have forced the Empire to give a clear answer, and the girl, nervous, asks if he wanted her to start a war. He can talk about battles all he wants, because he will always be safe, but the only ones who die in war are innocent citizens. Then the commander says he understands that she cares about people. After all, before being chosen by the gods, she was nothing more than an ordinary girl from a small town. Once the conversation is finished, the annoying guy finally leaves, and the priestess thinks that she is the divine representative. But in reality, she doesn't have any kind of power. She was born and raised in a small rural town, and one day, she was chosen by the sun god. And she received that divine power. Thanks to that, she was able to ascend to the position of priestess of the sun god. However, the knights of that group are nobles, and for them, serving a commoner is basically unacceptable. In the end, they ignored her completely, while she expanded her influence through violence. While they did so, they indulged in their power games, dragging ordinary people into the war to be sacrificed. In the middle of that situation, the girl even shed a tear, wondering why God had chosen her, saying that if someone as reliable and brave as the protagonist could lead the sun god knights, the story would be completely different. Then the scene changes to our boy, and the spirit asks if he really plans to go to the sun god church. But he replies that Maruna had warned him to be careful. Other gods might be looking for him, and the sun god might be one of them, so it's better not to get involved. A little later, Asher finds himself before a door, saying that that is the entrance to the Rabia kingdom. The spirit asks how they are going to enter through a door that is locked. Anton Cesar touches a stone, and a secret passage opens, saying that this is a method that a great mage once taught him. A powerful mage cast a barrier around the kingdom to protect its citizens, so entering without permission wouldn't be easy. But his case is different, because this method was passed down in secret only to trusted companions. The spirit says it's no wonder they call this place paradise, and at that very moment, someone attacks our boy, asking who was there. A hooded girl appears, and Asher can't stop looking at her, thinking that this girl definitely looks very familiar. Then the girl says that this is a secret passage that only authorized people can access, and asks one more time who the young man is. Just then Asher remembers who she was. And at the same time, two more people appear in the scene. Everyone looked at the protagonist. And then one of the soldiers recognizes Asher, saying that he is that guy whom he had seen in the Empire. Basically, they had met at the Door of Swords. He easily opened the first door and entered as if nothing happened. But the story doesn't end there because, after passing through the Door of Swords, which was completely destroyed, seeing the situation, the girl says that he must undoubtedly be a demon. Everyone immediately raises their weapons to face the boy, and the spirit asks what they are going to do, because the two are already ready to fight, and drawing his sword, he says, there's no way to avoid it, and he will have to face them right. Everyone is surprised by the skill that Asher just demonstrated, but without wasting time, they rush straight into the fight. Asher manages to block the blow, wondering if that guy wasn't the best in the academy. His posture is quite decent, but even so, it is still very far from his level. Then the boy is sent flying far away, and the hooded girl positions herself at the front of the fight. She lunges at our hero, using some kind of water ability, asking him where he got that gauntlet and how he can use that spatial magic. The young man says that it is a gift from his master, and that his name is Ivan. Immediately, the girl steps back, saying that, now that he mentioned it, she had heard some rumors. Apparently, Ivan had a disciple in some territory, so it must be the swordsman everyone talks about so much. Full of confidence, Asher says that is exactly right, and his master also taught him the way to this passage. To make it easier to understand, he had gone there to meet with the lord of the Rabia kingdom, who is a close friend of his master. Once everything is clarified, the hooded girl says that they were there investigating the cause of the fall of the Rabia kingdom, and introduces the guy standing next to her. She says his name is Poitani, who is a swordsman from the Regan kingdom. The other one is Reuben, and he is a historian. And finally, she is named Badrig, and she is a mage. Upon hearing that, Asher says that she must have learned that magic from someone, because he had heard that the lord of this place had a disciple, and that probably she was there to find her teacher. Upon hearing that, Badrig is surprised that he knows all that. By stating that she is a student of the lord of the Rabia kingdom, the spirit asks how he knew. And Asher thinks he saw her when she was just a child. The archmage raised a girl as his adopted daughter, so that she would be his successor. And now that girl has become a very beautiful young woman. Then she says that she stayed away from the Rabia kingdom for a long time, and dreamed of a life of freedom outside the castle. Her teacher was like a father to her, but he was so strict that he only cared about magic, and they ended up arguing many times because of that. That's why one day, she secretly left the kingdom, hiding her identity as a disciple, and living among ordinary people. But then, with the passing of time, she heard rumors that the kingdom had fallen, and by chance, she met those people and decided to travel with them. Poitani asks why the kingdom fell suddenly, and the girl replies that she doesn't know. In any case, she has the intention of finding her teacher and hearing the story for herself. At that very moment, the group comes across a door, and she says that that is the entrance to the Rabia kingdom. Without wasting time, Asher says that he will go first because there might be monsters or demons there, and tells them to stay on guard. Thus, the boy finally opens the door and is surprised by what he sees. The city was completely normal, and Asher asks if it is really a fallen kingdom. They start walking around the place, and the girl says that the Rabia kingdom looks the same as always. However, Asher, in his thoughts, realizes that he was feeling a threatening presence. Then Poitani approaches a small stall and asks the man how much that fruit costs. However, when he looks at the old man, he doesn't seem very friendly. The mage also tries to talk to the residents, asking if they have heard any rumors about the archmage. But Reuben says it makes no sense. To make it easier to understand, the people of that place, literally, no longer have a soul. And Asher, observing the situation, says that everyone is already dead, and they only repeat the actions they performed in life. It is practically a city of walking corpses, and Poitani asks how that happened. But of course, Asher had no idea, since, although he had seen countless battlefields and destruction, he had never witnessed anything so strange. Then Reuben says that the archmage wanted to create the one and only true paradise on earth, a world in which magic took care of everything that humans needed. He wanted to build a kingdom where people could live comfortably, free from worries and hardships. But in the end, magic consumed them, and they lost both their self-awareness and their lives. The mage says that her teacher only wanted to create a world similar to paradise, but they ended up falling into ruin in a gruesome way. Anyway, perhaps this is the result of his arrogance in believing in the power of magic and challenging the authority of the gods. A little later, the group finally arrives at the palace. Badrig says that that is where her teacher is staying, and Reuben says that security there is very strict. But Poitani doesn't care in the slightest and says that they must simply move forward. At that very moment, a guard appears behind him, but then the mage manages to save him, saying that the guards detect intruders, even if they are only empty bodies. Right now, those guards no longer recognize her as the archmage's apprentice and only see them as enemies. So they attack, as is natural. Without wasting time, Asher attacks several soldiers at once, but incredibly, no matter how many times they were knocked down, they simply got back up and continued their work. If this continues, they will be fighting there forever. And shortly after, a barrier appears surrounding that army of soldiers. The one who did it was Asher, who, wielding his staff, tells everyone to enter the castle now, because he will keep them at bay for the moment. Faced with that, the spirit asks if that is the reward the Empire gave him. Basically, it is a rare weapon from the Imperial Vault that the Emperor gave him. In short, a staff that generates a barrier that was even used in the war to restrict the enemy's movements. Still, it is only a temporary spell, and obviously, it won't last long, right? Everyone starts running toward the castle without wasting time, and at that very moment, as usual, one of the idiots ends up falling. At the same time, unfortunately, the barrier breaks, and then my friend, the guy, already knew he was screwed. A few seconds later, everyone realizes that Reuben had been left outside, and by now the barrier has disappeared for good. Anyway, he is going to go rescue him. However, the boy appears there as if nothing had happened, apologizing for the delay. He managed to escape by the skin of his teeth, and man, I don't know how, but he made it, you know. Everyone continues walking through the castle, but Reuben notices something strange about the protagonist and wonders why he is acting like that. Yes, I already realized this isn't going to end well. And outside, all the other soldiers had been completely wiped out. Back inside the castle, Badri says that this is the central building where her master's office is. He is most likely investigating a way to restore the empire. And at that very moment, smoke begins to envelop the place. The spirit asks if Asher perceives anything, who immediately replies that it is the smell of something decomposing. Without wasting time, the girl starts running and goes through a door. She is shocked by what she sees. Unfortunately, her master had already passed away. Badri falls to her knees and with tears in her eyes. She asks who could have done something like that. Everyone watched the situation in silence. And at that very instant, the skeleton starts talking and tells Badri to shut up. Nobody understood what was happening, and the skeleton asks where the girl had been all this time to return now. Now Badri asks what is happening, and the skeleton replies that it is just an illusion. After all, he is an archmage, and a trick like that is nothing to him. Changing the subject, he tells her that she must have already seen the ruins of the fallen kingdom on her way there. The residents she saw were also fake, placed there as decoys, and the real residents are already safe, living in an underground city. At that moment, the girl is glad that everyone is okay, and Puitan asks why the archmage made it look like the kingdom had been destroyed. And the man says it was because of the demons. A high-ranking demon has its eye on the Rabia kingdom, and honestly, that is too much to face alone. So he simulated the fall of the kingdom to evacuate the citizens, and buy time to find some way to resolve it, but that doesn't matter anymore, because he is happy that his daughter has returned, and apologizes for having been so distant all this time. Besides the fact that she brought some friends, and looking at the protagonist, he asks if he wasn't a student of high band. Everyone must be tired, so they can leave now because he needs to have a long talk with the boy. Once everything is settled, the whole group leaves the room, and then the skeleton says that enough time has passed. Calling our hero captain of the guard, Walshore says that, as expected, he recognized him in a second. The skeleton says that he may look different, but that he can undoubtedly feel that his soul is the same. And then Asher asks, what on earth happened to him? He replies that it is a curse linked to the power of the heroes. And in the end, he destroyed his own kingdom with his own hands. In short, the Rabia kingdom really fell, and he had also now become undead. Basically, he had lied to reassure his student. But in any case, he wanted to be a great lord who used magic to protect the kingdom and bring comfort to his people. However, the opposite happened, because that power ended up draining human souls and leading the kingdom to total ruin. It was then that he realized that the hero's power, which was once used to save the world, is paradoxically a dangerous force that can also bring destruction. Upon hearing that, Asher says that Ivan also had his doubts because he questioned the true nature of his power and if his sword skill was really the right path. The archmage says that is exactly it, stating that he must have already witnessed the fate of the heroes of the past. Balbarka's mind was corrupted, and it turned him into a demon. Besides that, the Lord of the Depths sought the help of demons and tried to overthrow the empire, asking him what he thinks would happen if the hero's power were also corrupted. Basically, a catastrophe would occur on a completely different scale than the Demon King's invasion. And that is why he sacrificed all his power and his life to forge that sword, asking Asher to take it, mentioning that it is called Fenrir, and that it has the ability to absorb the power of heroes. It is the only salvation that could put an end to the age of heroes. And for that reason, he has a request to make of the captain of the guard to be more specific. He wants him to use this sword to end his life. He is the only one he can trust to do it. Upon hearing that, our boy was trying to take it all in, wondering if the archmage wanted him to take the life of another dear friend with his own hands. Once again, the two remained there in silence, and having no other choice, our boy just apologized. He stabs the dagger into the archmage, who is finally freed. The boy realizes that the magic illusion was disappearing, and that everything was being absorbed by that blessed dagger. The old man finally recovers his original form, and thanks the protagonist for having done it, and that he will finally be able to rest in peace. And Asher asks him if this is going to be a goodbye, and he replies yes, that tomorrow he will say goodbye to his student for the last time, disappearing completely along with his kingdom. In any case, this is the moment to express his gratitude. And changing the subject, he asks if he hadn't been reincarnated. He replies that it's almost that, and that at first he thought it had been the god Marin, and who had done it, but it doesn't seem like he was the direct cause. And upon hearing that, the archmage says he knows something that can help him, asking him to look for the red forest elves in the far north. Those creatures belong to a different clan, and are high elves who usually view humans favorably, and therefore they possess the sacred skills to read and heal souls. Perhaps they can help him discover what really happened. And upon hearing that, Asher asks if that isn't the place where Rabania has her domain. The Archmage says that is exactly right, and that is why when he gets there he has to see if the girl is okay, because he has heard that the northern goblins almost invaded the Empire. But still, our boy didn't want to meet that woman, and the Archmage says that she is still his companion. And although she is arrogant, she is quite admirable. She chose to live in that hostile land of her own free will, just to protect humanity. Asher also has a good heart, and that's why he is sure that he and Rabania will be able to reconcile. Shortly after, the little group from before was in the Archmage's room. Happy that he had regained his true form, Badri says she hasn't been able to find our boy, and her father says that he has already left. The boy is busy carrying out Haiban's orders, and it's a shame, but he also has to leave. And Badri asks him where he is going. He replies that the demon's surveillance is getting worse, and at this rate, he may no longer be able to protect the kingdom. In any case, he plans to hide it and take refuge in an underground city. The girl says she understands and asks when they will see each other again, and the old man remains silent, but asks her not to worry. After all, they won't stay there much longer. And then, at the same time, he gives the girl a kind of amulet. He tells her that with this pendant she will be able to use barrier magic, and hopes she becomes an excellent mage. The girl is happy for the gift, and then the old man says it has been a pleasure to meet all his friends. In any case, it is almost time to close the kingdom, so it is better that everyone leaves now. And after wishing his apprentice a good trip, she finally leaves, and then the old man stays there. Alone in the darkness, at that very moment, Asher appears there, and the Archmage says that he has already given up his magic, so his job is already done, mentioning that the captain of the guard should also leave. And in the end, all humans turn into dust, asking him not to be sad. Upon hearing that, our boy remains silent, but in his thoughts, he asks the Archmage to rest in peace. Finally, he also leaves the castle, and Reuben just observes the situation, saying that it is very tragic, that a kingdom that was considered a paradise has had such an end. But then Asher suddenly tells him to shut up. At the same time, he attacks Reuben, asking him how he dares to still be there, calling the boy a disgusting demon. So that's a demon. At that very moment, he bursts out laughing, saying that it's no wonder he has been so cold. Anyway, he is quite smart, calling our boy the one who doesn't change. Honestly, he is very perceptive, because he completely hid his magic and even disguised himself as that human. The spirit says he couldn't perceive absolutely anything, asking how Asher knew. Does he think he recognizes that voice? Because it is the voice of the demon who toyed with him and caused the death of Kruako. Then the demon asks to introduce himself one more time, mentioning that he is the supervisor of the demon realm called Bafula. Asher thinks he has heard that name before, and it is a being registered in the forbidden books of the Empire's underground library. He is described as the god of the demon realm, and Krakos should probably also have read those forbidden books and searched for them to obtain this magic, raising his sword. The protagonist tells him to get to the point and asks why he has appeared before him. Who? With a laugh, he claims he only came to see what that so-called paradise was like, but it seems it was a failure. And it is sad that someone thought he could build a kingdom with such inferior magic. Besides that, he is interested in that sword he has received, and he would undoubtedly be happy if the protagonist handed it over. It has quite interesting abilities, and perhaps destroying the human kingdom would turn out much easier with it. Obviously, our hero wasn't going to hand it over so easily, right? And lunging at the demon, he tries to land a blow, but incredibly, it has no effect. And Botfula says that he is the god of the demon realm, and that things like superhuman strength or mastery of skills mean nothing to him, and honestly, killing him would be no problem. At that very instant, Asher goes flying, and the demon who summons a portal says that is enough games for today. But he has to stay alert, because next time he will undoubtedly take that sword. Until then, that's how things will stay. And then the spirit asks if Asher is okay. Who? Observing the situation, he bursts into laughter, thinking that this is a power level he has never felt before. Shortly after, the spirit asks Asher how he feels. He asks him if he knows anything about Bufola. The spirit says that he is a divine being even above the demon king, and that he has also participated in the creation of the demon realm since the beginning of time. Besides that, he not only watches over the demon realm, but also observes all worlds. And Asher says that that guy already knew the sword had been handed to him, and that he had also called him the one who doesn't change, asking one more time what that could mean. The spirit says Bifula probably knows his past life, and also refers to how, For decades, he never stopped using his sword and honing his skill. Upon hearing that, Asher thinks that he could be the cause behind all this. He could also be killing the heroes of the past one by one, and it is very likely that he joins forces with the Demon King to destroy the kingdom, which means that defeating him with swordsmanship alone definitely won't be enough. And for that reason, he will need overwhelming power. At that very instant, an enormous shadow appears, and Asher is surprised that that creature is still alive. It is the same bandit from before who absorbed the aberration's power. And the man says that the power of a great god would not be defeated so easily by someone like him. Without wasting time, Asher draws his sword, and then the shadow says that this time he will make sure to defeat him. With a single punch, our boy goes flying, who thinks he is still tired from his last fight. The monster says his end has arrived, declaring that he will adopt his full form, and he will become the great god of this world. Our hero was still very tired, and at that very moment someone asks, what kind of god causes disturbances in his sacred domain? A girl appears on the scene, asking who they are incredibly. The monster replies saying he is a god, and orders the girl not to interfere. But she asks him how a mere aberration dares to act as if he were a god. And why doesn't he leave immediately? Faced with that, the creature gets enraged and lunges at the girl. And just at that moment, the spirit realizes that that woman is dangerous. The girl was just observing the situation, and with total calm, she hits the creature. The defeat is easy, and the girl says that this is her domain, and that, inside this place, her power and authority are absolute. At that very instant, an explosion occurs, and the spirit asks who that woman is. Then she approaches our hero and asks if the traveler is okay. She seemed to recognize Asher's soul, who replies that it has been a long time calling her. Nameless God. Shortly after, the girl already realized that the protagonist was the captain of the guard, and asked him why he had that form. Meanwhile, a soldier says he has heard a loud noise coming from the other side of the forest, and asks what happened, and the boy says it looks like an explosion was caused by the destruction of something. The priestess was watching everything from afar, wondering if the protagonist was in that place. The commander then orders them to change course and direct their forces toward the forest, thinking that it seems the search area to find Asher is narrowing little by little. The scene then changes to a house. Asher says that, thanks to her, he feels a little better. The girl says she will bring him something to eat, and the spirit asks him how he knows her, saying that she once held the status of a goddess, and is at the same level as the sun god in Marogenia. The spirit is surprised that a goddess lives in the human world, and Asher says that she is the only goddess who has descended to earth. The nameless goddess was once worshipped as a deity, but she abandoned her divine name, and ended up descending to the human world. That is why she lost all her abilities, and now lives as a human. However, within her own domain, which is this forest, she can exercise the absolute power of a god. Shortly after, the girl says that the protagonist has been through a lot, and that he has not only lost the friends of his past, but he is also being attacked by demons. Asher says that is exactly right, and mentions that even after death, he cannot escape a life of misery. However, the goddess says that, in this twisted world, he is one of the most normal, because his pure soul and high level of achievements awaken the envy of others. It was precisely for that reason that she recognized his worth and had chosen him. In the past, although the protagonist did not believe in God, he was suspicious of that woman, and she felt the same and wanted to make him her apostle. If he had accepted, he would have obtained immense power, but unfortunately he ended up rejecting her. Obtaining power in that way would not be his own achievement, and the girl says that is precisely why she wanted him as her apostle. She had seen many people succumb to the temptation of power, but he never wavered, following only his own path, and honestly, she cannot understand how captivating that is for a goddess. And she asks him if he doesn't want to reconsider and become her apostle in this life. Upon hearing that, Asher says that she definitely hasn't changed. At that very moment, someone knocks on the door, and wow, the commander from before was there. The goddess appears at the door to receive them, and the soldier says they are the Solar Knights. In short, they are looking for someone, and ask if she knows a man named Asher. The goddess replies naturally that she does, and calling the protagonist, she tells him that he has visitors looking for him. And upon hearing that, our boy thinks that she should have pretended not to know him, right at that very moment. The commander breaks into a smile, and drawing his sword, says that they have finally met. At that instant, the boy thinks, shit, this was going to happen, and at the same time, the priestess appears on the scene. Asher just observes everything in silence. The interesting thing about this story is, without a doubt, His evolution is not the typical hero who receives power out of nowhere. He was already strong, but now he is in a world where his strength is no longer enough. That creates a constant sense of tension. There is always someone stronger, something more dangerous. Furthermore, the world is full of mysteries, the true nature of the hero's power, demons watching from the shadows, and entities like gods that are in his way. All this creates an epic and dark atmosphere at the same time. But if we talk about the not-so-interesting part, the story can sometimes feel too overloaded. Too many concepts, too many strong characters appear very quickly, and they are not always given enough depth. Also, the protagonist can seem almost unstoppable at some moments, which reduces the sense of risk a little. Still, the story maintains a very powerful vibe, a warrior who doesn't change, who follows his own path no matter the world that surrounds him. Do you think Asher will be able to face beings like gods and demons, or is his path already destined for disaster? Write your opinion in the comments. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because many more incredible stories are coming. Subscribe to the channel